Okay. So Connor will be voting and Nick. Is that
Allison
what you said?
just jumped on.
Allison jumped on, but she
Allison. Okay.
has to leave. So.
Oh, okay.
Hey, Allison, good to see you. Thanks for hopping on for a bit. My back is hurting a little bit, so if I turn off my video or something or start wandering around, I may be because I'm getting up and wandering around. But I'll still be here. I'm not going to leave. Don't worry. All right, it's 7. We may get the word. Are we live, Dan? We may be live. We don't get the TV thing where they go 5, 4.
Yeah.
You guys are currently live. Sorry.
All right. Well, welcome to the April edition of our Conservation Commission. I think last April we may not have had a meeting, but we've been at this for a while remotely, and I think we're doing pretty good. I'm looking forward to another meeting here. I'll read our preamble and then we'll get going. Good evening. As Chair of the Conservation Commission, I am declaring that an emergency exists and am invoking the provisions of RSA 91A-2-3B. Federal, state, and local officials have determined that gatherings of 10 or more people pose a substantial risk to our community in its continued efforts to combat the spread of COVID-19. In concurring with their determination, I also find that this meeting is imperative to the continued operation of town government and services, which are vital to public safety and confidence during this emergency. As such, the meeting will be conducted without a quorum of this body physically present in the same location. At this time, I also welcome members of the public accessing this meeting remotely. Even though this meeting is being conducted in a unique manner under unusual circumstances, the usual rules of conduct and decorum apply. Thank you for your patience. Let's start by taking the roll call attendance of the members, Conservation Commission members. I know we have some other folks on. We will get to those folks as needed. So when each member states their name, please also state whether if there's anyone in the room with you during the meeting.
So how about if I jump on and call the roll?
Yes.
In my order.
Yes,
Drew?
Sally, you do that. I'm here and I'm alone.
Trevor?
Hey there, Trevor Matera. I'm here and alone.
Sally Ward is here and alone at the moment. Dave Short is not with us tonight. Bill Campbell?
Bill Campbell, and I'm here alone.
Carlos Guindon?
Carlos Guindon, and I'm alone.
Allison Eberhard?
Hi, Allison Eberhard. I'm alone in the room.
And our alternates are Ginny Robb.
I'm Ginny Robb, and I'm here alone.
Don Clement.
Don Clement, and I'm home in the room alone.
And Nick Campion.
I am here and I am alone.
Kristen Osterwood. Kristen, are you there? Yeah. And are you alone in the room, Kristen Osterwood? Okay. Connor Madison.
I am here and alone.
And Julie Gilman, our select board rep.
Good evening. I am here and in my room and alone.
Kristen Murphy, our natural resource.
I'm here and alone in my room.
And we have guests tonight, Frank.
I'm here and I'm alone. Frank California.
Jim Gove.
Hi, Jim Gove, and I'm here alone.
And Christian Smith.
Yes, I sound like Christian Smith here and alone in the room.
And Luke Hurley.
Yep, Luke Hurley. I'm here alone in the room with my dogs barking in the background. Sorry.
Did we get everyone? Oh, I hear the dog.
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
Although there's some phone-in folks here tonight, I don't think we need to introduce them at the moment as they're the listeners.
Introduce Justin?
Oh, Justin?
Sorry. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Justin Passe. Good evening, everyone. I'm here for the second application. I assume you were referring to me.
Yes.
Okay, nice to see everyone. I'll look forward to talking to you on the second application.
Great.
Thank you, Justin. Okay, before we get into our action items, is there any public comment from anyone not related to the action items on the agenda?
Did have a public comment question from a neighbor that approached me when they saw that my name on the board. They were curious about the land near the reservoir at the back of the neighborhood that's wheelwright and toll. And if there's any chance of the town owning that land and turning it into conservation uses, since that's how it's used already, even though it's private land.
Do you mean along Wheelwright Creek?
No, like Wheelwright Ave and Toll, like at the end of that neighborhood, I can't remember the street at the back, but the reservoir's back there across, like on the other side of where the sportsman club is. They're on the one side of the reservoir, and then there's neighborhoods on this side, including Windermere.
It's off High Street and back to Rocky Hill Road.
Yes, yeah, connects to a couple neighborhoods on that side of High Street.
Yeah, that is a private landowner. We did have early discussions with them, and at this time they're not interested.
Okay.
If we're talking, you're talking about off of Rocky Hill Ave.
It's off of, I think the access normally comes off of Toll, but it's all connected through trails back there that with COVID, almost everyone in these neighborhoods has been using. So, but we know that it's privately owned. But yeah, one of my neighbors wanted to ask about if there's any potential of it becoming official conservation land.
Yeah, there are currently two lots being subdivided out of that big one and being developed as single family residence.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Does anyone else have comment or any public comment before we launch into the first action item?
If I may say real quick, Mr. Chair, if the person who has called in would like to raise their hand to speak, you can press *9 on your keypad and it will raise your hand in the Zoom meeting.
That's very helpful. Thank you. So *9 if any one of the listeners want to make a comment or raise their hand, and then we bring you in somehow. Dan will help us. We don't usually get this. This is exciting. Okay, seeing nothing, let's move on to the first action item. We're going to do a conceptual discussion regarding a residential multifamily unit with the prime wetland buffer and structural setback at 32 Charter Street, tax map and lot 8236. So we have, I know, a few people here to discuss that project. I will turn it over to that group. Frank, is that you? Do you want to start off the discussion?
No, I'll let Christian Smith start. He's representing me on this.
Okay.
I can fill you in that we looked at that parcel, which that I don't know who previously owned it, but there was quite a lot of junk on the site, and some of it was cleaned up, but the rest of it is the way they're leaving it. It has some kind of pathways and docks built into the wetlands, car parts like axles and transmissions and all kinds of other stuff. I'm not sure. Some of you have walked the site, so you've seen it. Our goal was to try to develop it and do an infill project. We had talked to Dave Sharples that that's really what he wanted down that end of the street, some infill instead of new subdivisions with new roads. When we initially met with the Conservation Commission, I can't remember how many units we had originally as townhouse units. And we were asked to look at possibly putting a building there instead to try to minimize the impact. And the building itself seemed to have more impact. So what we brought you tonight is two plans that has the building that fits on site within the regulations, and also have a reduced townhouse plan. We've gotten rid of a few townhouses. I cannot remember how many we had initially, but we're down to 11 now to try to reduce the impact to the prime buffer as much as we could, to see if the Conservation Commission would support us on either of those. So at this point, I'll let Christian talk and fill you in more.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. I think I will probably start because I believe we were before you conceptually back in November. And I think I'll start with that plan, if I could have permission to share screen, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, please. That would be excellent. I think you have permission. I don't think we need to do anything.
All right.
Yeah, I think a number of us were there. I was at the site walk. We had a site walk, and then we had a discussion in the meeting that night, I believe.
Right. So this was the original plan that we came to you with in November. We had field located the wetlands, as you can see here. We had proposed 12 townhouse units in the configuration that's shown. And nobody was particularly excited about this plan, but we have gone through, and as Frank indicated, we got the commentary from the planning department was that, you know, a multifamily building might fit better here. So we went through, we now have a boundary survey, we got the density calculations developed on the plan based on the uplands versus wetlands. And I will switch over to the multifamily concept. And as Frank said, you can see this is the limit of the building. And it ends up being quite large with that level of density. And then, of course, the required parking, you know, eats up a good bunch of the buffers up to and including portions within the 50. And, you know, the only way we could get this to work, this edge of the pavement right here is probably based on the scale within about 6 feet of the edge of the actual wetland, not specifically the buffer. So Frank said, well, you know, I don't really feel great about that. So let's go back to an alternate townhouse concept, which I'll put up here now. This is 11 units. We've pulled the buildings back as far as we possibly can. I believe all of the building adheres to the 100-foot setback, but obviously has some encroachment into the 125 from that prime wetland there. And we were able to reorient the parking. So just a bit of it is close to the 50-foot setback, but the entire parking area proposed is outside that setback as well. So really, Mr. Chairman, what we're, you know, looking for from the commission is, you know, do you folks actually prefer the multifamily building? And then secondly, you know, do you find the 11 townhouse layout that we're proposing here more palatable than what we were looking at in November? And I guess with that, we'll address questions and concerns brought up by the commission.
I do just want to make a statement that this is conceptual discussion. None of the comments through this process are binding. This is just to give the developer and the applicant's representatives an idea of what you feel about the designs.
Yeah, thanks. That's a clear summary of the situation here. So this doesn't show the existing structure and the existing stuff on the parcel, but that is still there. It sounds like some of it's been cleaned up, but part of this was a sort of a remediation or removal of items within the wetland and wetland buffer. Is that correct?
Do you know the answer to that, Frank?
Jim could answer that probably best. He knows the project well too. So
to my knowledge, not a lot of actual work has been done inside the wetlands themselves. And we can't actually Frank cannot actually do any cleanup of the wetland inside the boundary until we have a pre-application meeting with the DES. This area, because it's a prime wetland, is considered to be a priority resource area. Now, this particular prime does not have a 100-foot state setback. So from that perspective, work can be done outside of the wetland boundary to do some of the cleanup. But as soon as you move inside the wetland boundary, even though it's considered to be restoration and cleanup, we have to have a permit because it is a priority resource area and it's considered to be a prime wetland. And it's going to be impossible to remove all of that material, including some structures that were built in there, without some soil disturbance. So even though a restoration effort would in fact require that we have a pre-application meeting with DES and we obtain an actual wetlands permit for that work. So I hope that clarifies a little bit.
Yeah, that helps. Allison, do you have a comment, question?
Yeah, I saw on the in the town notes it indicates that snow storage areas are indicated on the map, but I couldn't find them. Can you point to the snow storage areas as you're currently conceiving of them for this design that you have up now?
Yeah, I think the snow storage areas would be in this location, and then again off the edge of the pavement here. Obviously, when they remove snow, they're going to have to back drag from in front of these units' garages and then push it. They could also get some snow in here. The idea would be, not to just kick it off the end of this particular parking lot or parking area to keep it out of that 50-foot buffer.
A follow-up question, what would be done with the area from behind those parking to the wetland? That wide strip area.
This area here?
Right in there.
Well, this, the areas, obviously the existing buildings would be coming down.
Right.
This area of pavement would be removed. The limits of pavement, Bill, would be right as shown on the plan here. And anything else that's out here, as Jim said, once a wetland permit secured from NHDES, that would be completely cleaned up. The removal of the, makeshift bridges and docks and things of that nature would be taken out, and the site would be completely remediated from, the junk pile perspective.
No. So, and what would be done with that area then, where your cursor is right now?
I would have to defer to Jim on that specifically, Bill, but my assumption would be it would get restored and then seeded down with the New England Conservation grass and forb mix, which I think is specifically designed for wetland buffers, wetland buffer reseeding.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay.
Other comments? Don, do you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. Kristen, I think you mentioned that there were, in the townhouse unit plan, there were garages?
Yes.
Are these one-stall garages?
They are.
So I also see on the plan, I'm counting 15 off street parking, whatever you want to call it. Is the number 15? Am I right in the 15 parking places? I tried to count, but you keep wiggling the screen on me.
I apologize. So yeah, each of the units would have a space in the garage, and then there would be 14 ground stalls.
So why do we need that many ground stalls?
That's just the requirement based on the calculations in the zoning.
So there's 11 units and 11 parking garages, excuse me.
Right.
For 11 vehicles. And then we need it in the zoning, subdivision regulation, not zoning, I guess.
Yeah, you're right.
Require another 14.
They require 2 spaces per 2-bedroom unit, and then 1 additional space per 4 units. So every 4 units, you have to add an additional space for visitor parking.
Okay.
And that's what brings us up to the 25.
I always get concerned about, not the enormity, but parking is just it's such a blight on the, pervious conditions, drainage, it's, the more we can reduce parking hours, the more comfortable I feel. And I'm just, a little concerned about, more pavement than we need to have down here. But you answered my questions. That's the first questions I had. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One other question. It looks like the amount of, when this is all done, if this was done, the townhouse units, that the amount of space covered by the units plus the parking, this sort of permanent, pervious part, impervious part would be smaller than with the other. I keep flipping the maps back and forth, but would be smaller than with the townhouse or the whatever it was called.
The multifamily?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be significantly smaller. In fact, I can zoom in on that a little to show you. So this entire building obviously would be impervious. And then all of this paved parking area, which again is driven by, as Don alluded to earlier, the subdivision regulation requirements for parking and visitor parking.
I think I prefer the 11 units.
It's 11 units versus 20 units, so it's a little apples and oranges. Is that fair to say?
It is. One is basically garden style apartments and the other is townhouses, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, and the difference is that you can't really build a smaller building economically that would be feasible to build on that site. So when you build a multi-family or multi-unit building, 20 is kind of the minimum threshold to get it to be economically viable. Otherwise, it costs too much per unit to even build. So I think the site, when we had looked at it with Dave Sharples, I think he said we could do 26 units. So we've actually reduced the building to try to reduce impacts to the minimum size. And that's what the problem we came up with was Dave, had suggested trying to go to a building, but the building is actually worse on the site than the townhouses were. So then we started looking, how can we refigure the townhouses to at least get out of the 50-foot buffer? And, we dropped a unit and tried to get the parking. But with the road still is coming down a hill, so we have to go to a certain point before we sweep into the lot. And we'd had the minimum parking requirements. And we even reduced the unit sizes from 3 bedrooms to 2 bedrooms and shrunk the size of them to reduce parking, to try to get it in something that's more feasible and still economically viable.
Okay, Sally, do you have a comment?
I have a question about the parking area. What is the proposal currently for the material that would be used for the parking area? Is it pervious or impervious?
Currently, the proposal is for just standard asphalt.
Okay. And what are your thoughts about making it pervious?
We are open to the suggestion.
Yeah. I prefer the townhouse units to the larger structure, and I would like you to consider the material being used for the parking areas to make it less, to make it impervious. Pervious, excuse me.
Yeah, would there have to be some sort of stormwater system associated with the pervious pavement? I don't see that.
With the pervious or impervious?
Here we all go. The impervious with the as designed here as traditional asphalt.
Yes, absolutely.
And then that's not shown here.
No, we haven't gotten that far. I don't believe we've had the actual soil mapping done, though Jim can correct me if that's not right. And of course, without the soil types, you can't really do any drainage. And quite honestly, Mr. Chairman, we haven't even gone further than a horizontal layout here. We haven't graded this at all to determine that. So yeah, drainage.
Yeah, there's a lot more work.
Yeah, that would be the next step is to grade the site, first of all, make sure everything works and is safe and functional. And then we would figure out, what and where to mitigate stormwater runoff.
Yeah, let me just jump in here a little bit on the soils now. We haven't done test bits, and so, but as you can see, along that northern boundary, it's a very steep cut slope. And so what we actually have here is the bottom of a gravel pit. This is what this site is. It's a bottom of a gravel pit. And the difficulty that I have right now in being able to say whether or not we can do or can't do porous pavement is the depth of the water table and whether or not we have a mineral restrictive layer down there. There's a reason why they stopped digging in this area. And that's typically what happens is they hit something to stop the excavation of the gravel because the gravel is no longer there. It's either clay down there or they hit a water table or there's maybe even bedrock down there. So we don't know what is there, but it's not natural soil. I can guarantee you it's not natural soil because the bottom of a gravel pit. So at this point in time, it would be hard for us to be able to say with any kind of definitiveness that, is that a word, definitiveness? That in fact, we can do porous here because the soil conditions just may not support it. So I just wanted to let you know that.
Jim, would you be getting runoff from the unit right north of it too, down that hill or down that?
It doesn't look it. At this point in time, it looks like it's being contained in its own drainage system up there. I did not observe any real erosion coming down off that pavement down that steep slope. It seemed to be pretty stable, Bill. So it's right now at this point in time, it doesn't seem that might be the case.
I don't think it would have bothered the previous owner by the looks of the place when I was out there.
Well, you may be true. That may be right.
Okay. So we'll acknowledge that this is a preliminary design. You certainly sharpened the pencil quite a bit from our last version. I guess to me, this design sort of meets the intent of our previous discussion, which was around the idea that we would have some flexibility with the wetland setbacks, the wetland buffer requirements, given the small nature of this site and its current condition, that we could come to some sort of agreement. This generally seems in line with what we had talked about last time from my perspective. I guess I'll say there's certain caveats. Everything isn't included in this. Like there isn't stormwater management. There isn't probably some other, I don't know if there are other things associated with this development that aren't shown that could have additional impacts to the buffer or wetland. That's my thoughts. Does other commissioners want to give any other feedback?
Jim, I would just ask one else. I'm sure you haven't been able to do any kind of wetland assessment, but by the looks of maps, town maps, it looks like that this wetland, which extends onto the other lot next to it, is kind of isolated and maybe was cut off by the railroad from draining down to Little River. Is that?
I think that's an accurate assessment. It was certainly cut off and isolated by that. I mean, there may still be a hydrologic flow that's going on through there, but in terms of like a physical barrier, you're correct that the railroad itself is in fact a physical barrier. But while it may not have that as much connectivity as we might like to the larger wetland system of the Little River, it does seem that it's functioning sort of I don't know how you call it, like a habitat island here, in that we have development around it, and yet if you actually go into it, there's actually believe it or not, he actually had a trail that went right across the wetland to the development to the south. But you actually go in there and you have a lot of diversity, Bill. It looks like there's a lot of wildlife there. So I think it might be more construed as like a habitat island than being a part of the greater Little River wetland system. If you get my drift.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Does any other comments? Kristen, you have your hand raised and a baby, so you have your hands full over there.
Yeah, I guess one thing I wanted to suggest when coming back with this, since it's on a wetland, is coming back with green infrastructure solutions to the rainwater management whenever possible. I know we've talked about pervious pavement as an option, but if there's a potential of installing a water feature or a rain garden that can help manage water and reduce stormwater surges, that would be useful. And also considering its location to impact from that it's near a wetland and where there's stormwater or sea level rise issues, that making the building as energy efficient as possible and contributing less to climate change and sea level rise would probably be in the interest of the people who own the building. And along those lines, is there availability for gas hookup in this area? I'm unaware.
I'm not sure either, but hopefully there is.
Yeah, I'm not positive, Kristen, but I believe that there is gas in Charter Street.
Yeah.
Okay.
How far down the street it comes at this point, I'm not positive about.
Okay.
It would be worth extending for us if it is in the street, though.
Okay. But yeah, I would yes, natural gas is it burns cleaner than some other options, but I would definitely focus on energy efficiency, especially with townhouses. You can get them so energy efficient with them sharing party walls. So
yeah, they are. Our minimum energy efficiency is zip system. We blow in insulation in the roof, so it's an R49 in the roof. They're very tight units.
Okay.
The next step, you have to go to spray foam, but then you do fresh air ventilation and it almost cancels each other out. So it's kind of a...
Unless you do an ERV.
Yeah, but they get very expensive and people don't want to pay for them. So that's where you kind of run into a problem. But our places are very efficient. We don't use any oil anymore. We, about 6-7 years ago, we stopped putting oil furnaces in. So we just cut that out completely. It's either propane or natural gas. And that's all we do now. And we are definitely open to doing bioretention areas and roof runoff and trying to capture that somehow.
Do you do air source heat pumps?
No, well, we've been doing on-demand hot water, which is much more efficient. Okay. And our HVAC systems are extremely efficient that we're using now. They're like 94% efficiency, 95% efficiency. So they are way more efficient than even 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, since you're making the buildings so efficient, what your heating load is, and if air source heat pumps would, and what the cost is to bring gas down to the units versus doing air source heat pumps.
Yeah, and I haven't done any. We've done a few high efficiency projects, but we haven't used. We did a project in Kensington where it was all solar heat with two giant water tanks and things like that. But it's very expensive. It was $60,000 just for the heating system in the house.
Yeah, I'm just talking about normal, like Mitsubishi Hyper Heat.
They work, but you'd have to install multiple. I have one here at my house, and it's very efficient. It costs during the winter about $42 a month to run a Mitsubishi system, and same during the summer with AC. They are super efficient. It just becomes tough when you have multiple rooms to heat and cool. So a lot of times if people want to finish basements, we're putting those in instead because they're so much more efficient than just putting another zone on a heating system. So it is something we were more than happy to look at, though.
Okay, yeah, you can definitely do a whole house with just a few heads.
We've worked it. We did that one in Kensington. We used a Mitsubishi system with multiple heads. So it's just trying to convince people, efficiency seems to come down to a cost issue with people. They always want it, and then when they find out how much it costs, all of a sudden they're not as interested in it anymore. So, but we do, our houses are much tighter, and if you look at the houses we were building 20 years ago, we're using half as much energy to heat and cool a house as we were 20 years ago, which is pretty impressive.
What ERVs have you looked at using?
Well, we've used Mitsubishi and Haier are the companies that we mostly use.
But for ERVs, no, not for heat pumps, but energy recovery ventilation.
We really haven't been using them much.
Okay. I'm just wondering, with, pandemic indoor air quality, concerns about that would definitely be a selling factor of increasing the ventilation and talking about.
Yeah, some of the things we've done are we put the UV lights in the systems on the HVAC systems, which seems to be the easiest way to do it. Those lights used to cost us about $300. Now they're about $1,100 to buy the same light we were buying a year ago. So that's the kind of stuff. And, because of the pandemic, and there's so much demand for stuff has kind of skyrocketed. But that's a good source to kill viruses and bacteria in the air as it travels through your system. And every house we build, we use a high efficiency 6-inch filter. So we're not using just a standard 1-inch filter anymore. We haven't done that in years. So we have the air quality is much better than it used to be. So,
okay. Thanks. Just things to consider from.
No, thank you. No, we love trying the new stuff. It's just getting people to want to pay for it. So, we're all LED lighting now in our houses, strictly LED. We don't do anything but that. And the HVAC systems are much more efficient. The houses are much tighter than they used to be. So we're getting there. We're crawling there slowly. So I'd like to do it sooner, but we're getting there.
Excellent. Thanks, Kristen. And those are a lot of good ideas for improving energy efficiency. I'm supportive of all that. Don?
Yes. If our objective tonight is to indicate a preference of the two plans, I want to say that the townhouse plan versus the multifamily, is that the multifamily unit, or is that what it's called? I'm always going to come down in favor of one that takes up less lot coverage and one that has less asphalt or hot top. So for my preference would be the individual townhouse plan would be more preferable for me than the one big unit plan for those reasons. I guess that's what the intent of this presentation is tonight, is to get our idea of which plan would be more preferable from a conservation standpoint. And so,
my sense is the townhouse is the only plan we're really discussing at this point. It seemed like the multifamily was shown just as a reference to how much better the townhouse plan is. I could be wrong about that, but
I think you are correct.
Yeah.
I agree with Don on the choice.
Okay. Does anyone have any other feedback on the townhouse plan that we want to provide? Otherwise, we might move on. Have we given you enough to work with, Frank?
We have. Thank you very much.
And others, Christian, any other comments or last questions of us?
No, I could just address one of the points that Kristen brought up. And with regard to stormwater treatment, almost without question, a filtration system like a bioretention pond or / rain garden would be basically the way we would be going out here, particularly in light of, Jim's concerns for water table, because if we are close to water table, those would have to be under drained. And the benefit of using that type of a technology for stormwater treatment is that it's the actual filtration media that does the treatment. So once it gets into the stone reservoir beneath that, the stormwater has actually already been cleaned. So I just wanted to put that out there for the commission.
Okay. Thank you, Christian. Kristen Murphy, do you have any final comments or input?
I do not.
Okay. Someone's got some music going in the background, which sounds more fun than our current meeting, but all right. Well,
I just had one additional comment, which is sort of a side comment, which is having been on the site walk earlier on with this piece of property, I think there are many variables in play, and I appreciate the openness to the developers for our ideas and our input. And I think the current condition of the site is problematic. And so I think there are many things in play that will be an improvement to the site as with regard to the to many aspects of it. The site is highly problematic as it currently existed during our site walk. So I think appreciate the openness of the developers to hearing our ideas and improving things, even if there are still touchy issues with regard to buffers.
Thank you.
All right. Well said. Thank you, Sally. Agreed with that too. All right. Well, I guess I'm not sure where we'll go from here, but you can be in touch with Kristen Murphy and as plans develop. We could do another site walk if needed. But I guess the ball's in your court.
All right. Thank you very much for your time.
Yep. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thanks, folks.
You too.
Okay. So now we're going to move on to our next agenda item. Which is, we have a wetland and shoreland conditional use permit for an open space development at Cullen Way, Tamarind Lane, tax map 9615, 969. We have several folks on the call, including some who were on our last project, to discuss this project. I will leave it up to the project team. Do you guys want to just start off with an introduction to the site? I know some of us were at a site walk in 2019. I think it was maybe the fall of 2019, where we went out and did a site walk. Some of us are newer to the commission and were not present for that site walk and discussion in 2019. So I guess I would ask that we do spend some time going over the basics of this project before we get into the conditional use permits.
Sure. Hi, good evening, Mr. Chairman. This is Justin Passe. Can you hear me?
I can, thanks.
Okay, great. So I'm here at DTC's offices in Exeter with Brian Grisette, who's the applicant. Happy to be with all of you here tonight. Thank you for your time. We're joined tonight, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, by Jim Gove, who's remote from Gove Environmental, and by Christian Smith from Beals Associates, who's an engineer on the project. I'd like to start just by confirming the materials that you have in front of you, which we filed back on the 2nd of April, which is sort of our comprehensive analysis detailing the two conditional use permit applications that we've filed, one for the Conservation Overlay District and the other for the Shoreline Protection District. In addition to that letter, we have an existing conditions plan, an approved yield plan, which the Planning Board approved a few months ago, a conservation open space recreation plan, a wildlife habitat assessment from Gove Environmental, a wetlands conservation overlay district impact plan, and then a shoreland protection district impact plan, which shows the actual proposed impacts to both of those districts in greater detail than what can be observed from the full sheet. And then a phase 1 environmental site assessment. Our proposal for tonight, Mr. Chairman, if it pleases the commission, is for me to just do a quick overview of context. I think you're spot on. We were here in December of 2019. At that point, the site plan, which is a single family open space site plan, was a concept. We were hoping for feedback from the Conservation Commission generally, sort of in the same vein as the last application before the commission tonight. A lot of the discussion at that time revolved around Brian Grisette's proposal to convey what I'll refer to as the Mendez Trust property. It's a large 31-acre property, which is adjacent to the proposed development site, to the town of Exeter. That's something we hope to talk more about tonight with all of you. And since that time, a lot has happened. So we'll give some context about the overview of the property, what's going on, the basis for the proposal. A lot of that discussion and the discussion you'll hear after that from Christian and Jim will be rooted sort of foundationally in this notion, which is so important to the commission and to us too, of avoidance and minimization. Because as you'll hear tonight, we really believe that we have a site plan put together which exemplifies that doctrine and really uses this property in the most beneficial way that accommodates reasonable development, but which is a great benefit to the environment and to the public as well. So we'll talk about that. Christian Smith will then go through the site plan. He'll talk specifics about the actual proposed impacts to the buffers and to the direct wetland impacts. Jim Gove will then do his analysis and an overview of his points and considerations that we memorialize in our filings. And then Brian Grisette, the applicant and someone with a lot of development experience, particularly with environmental and open space type development, and someone who is himself an abutter to this project, will give more context in history. And then really after that, we have two goals, Mr. Chairman. The first, I think, would be to just have as robust a discussion as the commission will entertain about our project. We want to answer questions. We want to provide explanations for why the plan is the way that it is and why it's depicted the way that it is. And we want to address any concerns that might be out there. And then secondarily, we're hoping again to discuss the notion of the Grisette's conveyance or potential conveyance to the town of that large 31-acre parcel we refer to as the Mendez Trust property. So the idea there is to discuss Mr. Grisette's ideas for that conveyance and to field from the commission its ideas and what it would like to see, if anything, in that context, to include, foundationally how that conveyance happens. Is it a conservation easement deed? Is it a fee, simple conveyance? That type of discussion would be very helpful, I think. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to just quickly share my screen to go through a few of the sheets to provide some context, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. I guess I'll just comment. It seems like a lot for us to cover all the conditional use permits and potential conservation easement fee ownership in one meeting tonight. So I don't know if we have priorities or not, but.
Well, I defer to the commission, Mr. Chairman. It seems like, look, we appreciate the point. It's a dense filing and there's a lot of information. We want to get it right. We want to make sure that the commission is comfortable. I would suggest, I think probably the best thing to do, if initially anyways, would be focus on the actual impacts we're talking about. Let's get, the history and the context of the application, a discussion about the property, and then an overview of the actual project and its impacts behind us. And that'll sort of frame the discussion moving forward, if that sounds okay.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. I mean, maybe we can. I don't know. I just want to make sure.
I totally understand.
Yep.
All right. Is everyone seeing that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So the first thing I want to, just to orient people, on the left side of the plan here, if you can see my arrow, that's Tamarind Lane. On the top of the sheet, this is Route 101 here. This area right here, which we'll get into, is town-owned property.
It's 111, just to clarify.
Yeah. 111.
I heard 101. I thought I heard 101. So
definitely not 101. 111, that's correct. This property, which we'll talk more about, is property owned by the town that the Grisettes conveyed to the town back in the early 90s. It's the Brickyard Recreation Park where the baseball field is. So just to orient people, this application really contemplates 3 properties total, okay? And I'm just going to sort of try to demarcate them as best I can. The first property that we'll talk about is what we call the Grisette property, okay? It's the plan left. It's this area right here. It's 23.6 acres of property. It contains currently the Grisette's single family dwelling here, which is accessed off of Cullen Way, which is off of Tamarind Lane on this side. So that's the first parcel, the Grisette parcel on the plan left side. The right side of the plan is the Mendez Trust property. This large chunk here, again, the lot boundary goes like this, it then veers east and then heads this way. This large 31-acre parcel is unimproved. It's just unimproved land. And then the third parcel we'll talk about is, as I mentioned, this town-owned property, which the Grisettes previously conveyed. Collectively, we're talking about 64 acres of property. And you know, as the first sort of foundational issue, particularly in the context of avoidance and minimization, when looking at this property, we really wanted to give you an idea about the type of land it is and where the wetlands are. And so what you'll notice on this sheet is that with regards to the areas of land which are open for development, there are essentially 4 areas of uplands. And it's this area up at the top, it's this area around the existing Grisette property right now, it's this area on the southern side of the plan, and then it's this area, which would be accessed off of the Brickyard condominium area over here. The rest of it is wetland. You know, it's mostly poorly drained soils, as Jim Gobe will talk about. But there's a prime wetland here as well, which is marked in this brownish color. And so, just foundationally, I want to plant the seed, and Brian will expound on it. But the idea here was to develop this property in a way that was most environmentally sound, and to discover and determine through sort of the wetlands analysis and the wildlife analysis and just Brian Grisette's anecdotal understanding of the property, having walked it the last 30 years, where is the best place to accommodate development on this property? And so for that, since we were last before the Conservation Commission at the end of 2019, we have been before the Planning Board. Under the regulations, as the Commission well knows, for properties of this size, doing open space residential development is a requirement under the subdivision and site review regulations. And as part of that process, you have to develop a yield plan, which is a conventional subdivision depiction on the property to determine what the property could yield. The zoning districts here that we're talking about are on the left side. So the Grisette property and the town property on the top, that's all in the R1 where, 2 acres is the minimum lot size, but where like here, there's town water and sewer, it's 40,000 square feet, which is the density in that area. And then on the right side, the Mendez Trust property is in the NP district where there's significantly higher density permitted. But the idea here with the development of the yield plan was just to depict really large R1 density lots in a reasonable fashion, which could theoretically be developed if that was the direction that the Grisettes wanted to go. And as we'll talk about, this yield plan, which was recently approved by the Planning Board, depicts 17 lots. They start on this corner, there's 1, 2, 3 in this area that would have been accessed via an extension of the Cullen Way cul-de-sac. There's a new subdivision road, which is consistent with our actual site plan proposal for a access road that would provide access to several lots in this area. Because the Grisettes have retained density rights over the town property via contract with the town in the early 90s, we depict 3 lots that would be accessed off of Route 111, and then 3 additional lots accessed over a right-of-way through the Brickyard condominium over here. So this is conventional subdivision that could be obtained. The planning board standard review is that it has to be reasonable, it has to be viable, and it has to be feasible. This plan met that threshold and the planning board approved it. But the thing I'll note, which is critical when this board thinks and considers things like avoidance and minimization, is that, again, referencing the upland areas that are available for development here, what you get in developing the property in this fashion is a lot more impact. And to be more specific, on this plan, there are 3 crossings, one in this area to accommodate the subdivision road, one in this area, and then another one in this area. On this plan, they're dark black are the actual crossing areas. And when you add those direct wetland crossing impacts up, it's over 12,000 square feet of impact. The corresponding buffer impacts are the same. It's about 4 times that which we're actually proposing for the development of the site plan, as we'll talk about. So that's critical in thinking about this project as a whole as we move forward. So Christian will get into more detail here, but we've included 2 sheets here just to depict the actual impacts. And I just want to note one thing, which I'm sure we'll focus on more. With regards to the impacts, 90% of them relate to the proposed access road, which is proposed to be called Wild Apple Lane. This sheet in particular depicts the Shoreland Protection District impacts. We note, as I said in our filing, the district boundaries within the zoning ordinance as defined talk about 150 feet from major tributaries. When you read further in the zoning regulation, however, it talks about the 100-foot setback. It's really unclear which applies. We talked to Kristen Murphy about this, and we understand sort of historically the town has interpreted it as the full 150 feet. So that's what we have depicted. So these are the Shoreland district impacts, which really pertain to the right of way only, because it runs sort of parallel to the actual resource, which is why those impacts are where they are. And then this sheet depicts, as we'll talk in further about with Christian and with Jim, the Wetlands Conservation Overlay District impacts, which again are overlapping to a large extent the Shoreline Protection District impacts, and relate 90% to the road and to detention ponds in these areas here. There are, as we'll talk about, 1,320 square feet of structural impact caused by Unit 1 here, Unit 10 here, Unit 11 here, Unit 13 here, and Unit 15 and 16. 1,320 square feet total of structural impacts to buffer areas that are adjacent to wetlands, which are, in the context of the full site, the lower value wetlands, previously disturbed wetlands, as juxtaposed to, particularly on the Mendez Trust, the prime wetland and a vernal pool on that side, which are higher resource areas that are being proposed to be protected from additional development forever. So again, this plan is nearly identical to the one, it's got more details, but it's nearly identical to the one that this commission looked at in December of 2019 favorably. I'm going to see if I can move to one more sheet before I turn this over to Christian. And this is really just to summarize what our theme is for this application, because when you look at this, again, just to orient people, this is the 31 acres of land, the Mendez Trust property, which the Grisettes are proposing to convey to the town. This is the area of the Brickyard Recreation Park, which the Grisettes already conveyed to the town. And this is a wet meadow, essentially, an area adjacent to the proposed development which the Grisettes are proposing to maintain through the homeowners association as open space wet meadow into perpetuity. So the takeaway from this shot, and really the theme of what we're trying to convey, is that as what started as a 64-acre parcel will ultimately, under this proposal anyways, be essentially 80% preservation or conservation land, and the remaining 20% utilized for the actual development, which really exemplifies, it's a great example of what open space development should really be all about. The project purpose here is to get 18 units. We think that that's very reasonable in light of the 54 acres essentially 64 acres that is based on. We feel like we're doing it in a way that, to the greatest extent possible, avoids impacts, and where it's not possible to avoid, minimizes those impacts. And we feel, as we've laid out in our filings, that this is an application which really meets the spirit and the intent of all the regulations, the town's master plan, and is a really nice development that both facilitates reasonable development, but also is a great benefit to the town. So that's sort of the overview. I appreciate your indulgence on that. At this point, I'll stop sharing my screen and I will turn it over to Christian, who will take it from here.
Thanks, Justin. Good evening again, commissioners, Mr. Chairman. So I'll just give you a brief overview, and unfortunately, I'm going to ask to share my screen so that I can use the plan as a reference, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I'll start with the plan that we put together for the Wetland Conservation Overlay District, because it really depicts, what we're looking at here. I'm going to bump this up and get us a lot closer in. So we, since we were before you last, have gone through a great deal of obviously engineering and, design of the roadway. We've been through now 2 technical reviews with the department heads and planning staff, and what they came up with, because we had initially proposed a 20-foot wide road all the way through. The TRC did not think that was a great idea, so what we've got now is a 24-foot wide road with 4-foot shoulders coming in through the actual wetland impact areas, and then we've got the mail kiosk. And after that mail kiosk, we then taper back to a 20-foot wide road with curbing, closed drainage, and we have 2 wet ponds, which is what the soils, allow us to design out here based on the water table. And again, this site was formerly disturbed with some level of excavation and then restored. So we've got a wet pond at this location, then again another one off the end of the cul-de-sac. So this results in a total wetland impact of 2,960 square feet. That's direct wetland impact. And you can see that highlighted, or I should say hatched, in the existing man-made pond, and then a portion of the wet meadow that Justin was speaking of earlier. In that area, we've got 11,002 square feet of buffer impact proposed. And that includes roughly 1,320 square feet for some minor building encroachment into the 75-foot paving and building setback. Out here at lot 10 and 11, or unit 10 and 11, I should say, this impact is driven by the fact that we have to provide a little connection down to this existing gravel road to allow for maintenance of that particular pond. I will tell you that as we've gone through this and done the engineering, Brian has also, Mr. Grist has also gone through hundreds of different house options. And what you see here for house footprints are actual, previously designed home footprints that he has shoehorned in here as best as possible to minimize the impacts and maintain the 25-foot separation in between the units. So each of these units will be sprinklered. due to that separation, but we do maintain a 25-foot throughout. And again, because of the pipe coming through here and the access, we did have to separate units 10 and 11, slightly more than that to facilitate that infrastructure. The entire property is going to be served by underground electric, underground gas, town water, and town sewer. So moving on then to the shoreland plan, if I can actually find my way to do that. All right, we're already at 50% here. So as you can see, our shoreland 150-foot setback is this blue line that runs here. That's off Scammon Brook. And the total proposed impact in that area is 7,983 square feet. And that's the sum total of the proposed impact within the 150-foot shoreline buffer, causing us to need the conditional use permit. So with that, I guess I will close with, just stating that we feel all the effort that's been put into this puts us in a position where we feel we've met all the criteria for both the conditional use permit applications before you. And, certainly if any of the commissioners see something blatant that they think could be improved or a way to get these done in a less impacting fashion, we're happy to hear it. But I think we have, gone above and beyond and really hammered this out to be the least impact to the environmental resources and their buffers as we possibly could have. And I'll take any questions before turning it over to Jim, if any commissioners have that, or would you just prefer to have the whole presentation in front of you first?
I just one question, Christian. The road widening, was that related to the utilities, space for utilities to get into the site, or what? Why was the road widened?
No, that was a request of the department heads, and I think it largely had to do with pedestrian safety.
And Christian, I don't want to jump in here, but I think you may have transposed the description at the top. The road initially was proposed as an 18-foot road coming off of Tamarin to minimize, to the greatest extent possible, the impacts to the resource area. That was at the request of the town expanded to 20 feet to accommodate a sidewalk. And then after the impact area and the mail kiosk, then the road expands to 24. So it starts narrow, it gets wider instead of the other way around.
You're right. I apologize. That was my mistake. Yeah. So I'm sorry, Drew. The road is narrower through the wetland crossing, and then it expands out to the 24 feet once we're out of the resource.
Okay. That makes sense.
Thank you, Justin, for that correction. Okay. My apologies.
Okay, so it goes from 20 with a sidewalk?
20 with a 5-foot sidewalk to 24 with a 4-foot sidewalk. Yeah, and I apologize for skewing those figures on my initial presentation.
I guess I'm curious, maybe Gove can keep going. At some point, someone will talk about the swamp white oak. But we can keep moving unless other folks have questions related to the design at the moment. I'm sure we could come back to it.
Okay, and with that, I'll turn it over to Jim and Luke.
So I guess I will talk a little bit with regard to the impacts to the buffers and to the functions and values of the wetlands and the direct impact. Christian, can we stick with that plan right there? I think that's a good plan for me to work with. So first, when you try to talk about impacts to the functions, you have to identify what the functions are. So we have on the north side of where this proposed road is a man-made pond. It was dug at some time in the past. It is deep enough that it actually has a fish population. And apparently has some sunfish in there and some minnows in there. And so because it has a fish population, it does not function as a vernal pool. So that might have been a question whether or not we have a vernal pool that's going to be impacted, but we don't. It's a man-made pond. And the good news is that it's going to be a very small portion of the edge of the pond that will be impacted. And obviously with the proper sediment and erosion control booms in there, we won't even have an impact to the existing fish population. So I don't see that particular functions of that pond being changed. It's the wildlife habitat from the standpoint of it has a fish population in it. Whatever runoff is being captured by that pond as it drains from the north to the south, and that's the drainage. It basically will stay as it is, functioning as it is. There is an outlet to the pond to maintain it at the same level as it is today. If we go to the south of the proposed road, what you'll see there is a forested wetland, and that forested wetland is part of a much larger ecosystem, and that forested area in a whole has a great many functions. It has wildlife habitat, it has stormwater storage, it has nutrient trapping, and so those functions do exist in that larger wetland system. But I think we need to recognize that this is an edge impact. This is just right along the very edge of that area. It has already been somewhat impacted by the existing access road that goes through there. And so because it's an edge impact, because it is essentially at the northernmost edge of this much larger system, wetland system, I don't think we'll see any degradation or removal of the overall functions of that wetland. Obviously, the exact portions that are struck will be lost, but again, it has such overall larger function because it's a huge wetland that this is just what I call just an edge impact. Now, as we move, and Christian, perhaps you can move that more to where we have the buffer impacts along the houses and that sort of thing. So here we have a different situation here. If we look to the south, we have a large open field that's been maintained as an open field. And because of that, there's essentially what I would call a view shed from the hill. So we actually, for those folks that are going to have houses there, we'll actually look across that meadow area and we'll have that view shed will be maintained. Now, from the standpoint of the buffer, any impact that takes place in that big open field is going to have an impact to wildlife that might be, and there'll be upland, more upland species and water-dependent species will have some impact by having development in that field. I don't see any real significant change whether you have an edge of a house in the wetland buffer or you don't, because essentially it's an open view shed that looks all the way down into that wet meadow area. And so while there certainly will be a disruption of wildlife that's actually using the upland area, it strikes me that some of the species will move further away that are using the wet meadow area from the housing, but it will still be maintained because it's a large wet meadow area that exists to the south. So again, I think we see minimal impacts to the functions and values of the wetlands by these areas of encroachment into the buffer. And so basically that was my analysis based upon the necessity of what you folks look at when you're looking at these particular wetland impacts. I'll be glad to answer any questions, or perhaps Luke would like to discuss the wildlife habitat. I'll leave that up to Justin as to how we should move on from here.
I certainly didn't intend to leave Luke out. Luke, I saw you in the last application. If you happen to still be around, it would be great to get your feedback and a summary of your wildlife habitat report.
Yep, I am still around. I can do that. So I guess the first thing to keep in mind is, I guess as we discuss the wildlife habitat assessment, and for those of you that on the commission that may or may not have looked at it, what the wildlife habitat assessment was, it was done to meet the requirements of the Alteration of Terrain Bureau and Fish and Game as part of the new rule that they have that came out last June. So it really deals more with the state aspect of what they're looking for with the wildlife habitat assessment. They have a template that is what I follow when I do my reports. I've had multiple conversations with Melissa Dobrowski up at Fish and Game as to, how she'd like to see these written. It was a learning process for everybody, Fish and Game, biologists, everybody involved as to what was to go into them and what we were supposed to focus on as the state looks at it to give recommendations to alteration of terrain, to issue permits for that kind of stuff. So it really is geared towards the state side of it. So if there are things that the town may have thought should be in there and weren't, it wasn't purposely omitted. It was really just because it was a wildlife habitat assessment required by the state. So what it is, it's just an assessment of the on-site habitat. With that on-site habitat, multiple types of habitat cover types that are out there. It is a list of potential species that could be out there. It's not a survey for known species. The Natural Heritage Bureau report came back with no hits for this area, no individual species of plants or animals or community types. So it didn't come back with any positive hits. But what we do as biologists when we do these reports is we obviously go onto the site, walk around, take notes, pictures. And with that information, we go back and do the desktop analysis part of it, which is going through all the wildlife action plan information that Fish and Game has available with the multitude of other sites that we look at. And what they have listed in the Fish and Game website is the community maps per town. I go to those maps and the list of potential species that could be there based on the cover types. And then I go down that list, and based on the cover types that I see on the site, I make the professional determination as to whether or not I think that critter would be using the site or not. And remember, it's just an exercise in potential use. It's not saying that they are there. It's just a matter of the habitat could support the species if it happened to find its way onto the site. So that's just a little bit of background with it. The biggest and I guess most overreaching habitat that's out there is obviously the wetlands. It's a significant part of the property, as Jim was just explaining, the wet meadow, the wooded swamps, the shrub swamps, Scammon Brook down below. It's a real significant portion of the site. So most of the species, I'd say probably 2/3 that I listed, really apply to the wetland aspect of it, whether they're reptiles or amphibians. Several bird species that were listed in that report that would be potential on site. As I say, they weren't known to be on site. They could certainly be there. It's just not a matter of determining that they were. It's just a potential for them to be there. There was also some potential meadow species there. And again, it's an exercise in potential aspect. So some of the bird species that I had listed out there, things like bobolinks and meadowlarks and a couple others, there's potential for them to be out there because really where the proposed project is in that open field area. but a lot of times they like much, much larger sites for open grass area, sometimes up to a couple acres per breeding pair. So there's a potential for them to be out there, but they may fly in and say, this is too small, it's not going to work, and then they just keep moving on. So it's kind of a quick overview of it. Obviously, any impacts to the species that may be using that field, as Jim said, they may get displaced. If they do, and I think I've had this in my report also, they have the opportunity to still continue to use that area to the south, which I think that Brian Grist and I had spoken about, that he's been maintaining it as open grassland, for the duration. So as it is a wet meadow in the spring, it's going to be a little bit wetter in the summertime. It's going to tend to dry out when those breeding species are in. So if they are actually using that site, it would have sufficient dry ground for them to nest. For the most part, most of them are ground nesters, as opposed to like a red-winged blackbird that tends to make its nest a little bit higher, in stiffer grass, mostly cattails and stuff like that. But that's the only place that I would really see a potential impact for any species that could be using that field area where the units are going. But as I said, they do have that opportunity to come in down the south. And then a lot of the maintenance plans that we put together as part of the reports and communications with Fish and Game is, if there are known species out there, the potential habitat for grassland species, that mowing is done typically once a year in the late fall, either September, October, when all the grassland species have migrated out. So there's no impact to them. So it's kind of a quick overview, but if anybody has any specific questions, I'd be glad to go over them. I just don't want the town to say, well, there's a lot of natural resources out there that weren't documented, but it wasn't a natural resources inventory report. It was more of a wildlife habitat assessment for rare and threatened and endangered species. They don't consider rare species anymore. So I don't know if there's any questions. I'd be glad to answer them.
Where are the vernal pools on this property? I don't know if that's for you, Luke, or for Jim.
I don't know if they show.
We can if you unshare Christian's screen, we can do it on our end.
Yeah, I don't know if it shows it. Yeah, I didn't know if it showed up on that plan.
All right, let's see here. That's not what I meant to do. I'm going to share my screen. Now you all are looking at the Town of Exeter's website.
It's beautiful.
All right.
Okay.
Go ahead, use the marker. The two vernal pools are in this area, but I'm going to allow Brian to use this. So this is one right here, this little dark shaded spot, and the other one is right here.
Right. Yep. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And I certainly don't want to. I mean, Jim or Luke and Christian should jump in if I'm wrong, but I think the subtext of the wildlife impact plan and Jim's comment that are sort of littered throughout our conditional use permit analysis are really that because of the approach taken with this project, choosing the upland on the planned north side is the one that greatest that minimizes and avoids impact to the greatest extent, both in the context of wetlands, as I tried to explain earlier by showing you what a conventional subdivision would look like and what the impacts would look like, which would be 4 times at least greater than what we're actually proposing, and in the context of wildlife habitat. It's not to say that there's no impact, it's just that the impact that will be caused will be the least amount possible in light of the other considerations, which is another point here to be made. There's lots of different configurations which could ultimately accommodate 18 units. As I said at the beginning, the project purpose here is 18 units. We think that that's a reasonable yield for what amounts to a 64-acre parcel, 50 acres of which is going to be preserved under this proposal or conserved into perpetuity. So 18 is the number. We can accomplish that in different ways. The idea here was to do it in the way that avoids the most amount of impact and to do it in a way that's most beneficial both to the goal and the spirit of what the Grisettes are trying to do and what they've planned for 30 years, and for the public too. The only other thing I want to just point out quickly, which before I turn it over to Brian, is that the proposed access area here, Wild Apple Lane, is coming off of Tamarin Lane over an existing right-of-way and over an existing road. I mean, there's a dirt road there. So much of the impacts there will be to previously disturbed areas in an existing dirt road, which I think is really important to note. So I'm gonna turn it over to Brian at this point, who's gonna just provide some additional history and context, and we'll be able to answer any question that anyone has about this property in the last 40 years at least.
Conservation plan.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Brian.
All right.
Not this. You want
the overall.
This.
There we go. Yes. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Brian Grist. My wife owns the parcels in question. I believe most of you know that for issues that occurred in 2018, my wife and I were forced to decide to develop the remaining land that we still owned, and came to the board or the commission in 2019 with this conceptual plan. Essentially, the plan is almost identical to what you have here. I've been doing open space development and environmental consultations since 1985 was my first one here in New Hampshire. And the general concept is in accordance with the zoning ordinances of the town of Exeter, in accordance with the master plan, we can look at wildlife mapping that were contained within the master plan, dated 2015 for wildlife corridors, contiguous. All of that was taken into account to try to maximize and obtain to the maximum extent the goals within the zoning and the master plan. So what we've got is we have 4 upland areas we have 5 upland areas on the yield plan, which to create our density. But one we deeded back in 1992 to the town, the park, Brickyard Park. We deeded it to the town at that time so they could build the park then, not wait 30, 40 years. So while we can use it for our density, we don't have it available to actually build on. The brightly colored map that you have seen identified the 4 wetlands, the 4 upland areas where there was developable area on the uplands outside of wetland areas and all the buffers. So the concept was how could we minimize wildlife impact and wetlands impact to the greatest extent, with the goal that if we could get all 16 units on one single upland, we would have the maximum extent of minimization of environmental impacts. So that was the challenge. And one of the reasons we chose this location is that there, as Justin had stated, there's an existing old gravel road that goes through there. It was a disturbed area. They'd already extended. So the amount of wetlands impact, it's a total of 2960, of which 40% is a man-made pond. So we're down at 1,600 square feet of actual impact out of 64 acres. The second reason for choosing that location is, as Jim had said earlier in his reports, is that we're adding development, but rather than putting it after the isolated areas within the property, we're just extending where current development already is. So the impact on wildlife would be less than if you went out and disturbed the larger areas and fractured the open space. And so putting it in that, the 16 units in that location was the optimum compared to spreading them out, like in the yield plan with a conventional subdivision, or of putting 14 of the single family homes here and then now having to use an additional wetlands crossing. When it comes to the wetlands crossings, you're looking at, for the Brickyard access to that, we were looking at over 7,000 square feet of actual wetlands impact plus buffers. For the Cullen Way extension, if we were going to attempt to use the buildable area on the southern uplands, it would be 2,000 square feet of direct wetlands impact plus buffers, but there was a limited number of units we could put there. So the goal was to try to get them all in one place. And then that became the challenge of engineering all and zoning to try to meet the requirements. So essentially what we were able to do is reduce by choosing this location. And if we could get the 16 units in, we would reduce direct wetlands impacts by 75% of the total. And we would reduce the buffers by approximately 60% reduction. And that's only because the access road where it's located at Wild Apple Lane runs parallel to the existing wetlands. But once again, as Jim stated, it's got a forested wetlands and its values and functions would be maintained. So essentially, on the shoreline impact, that there is an impact on the shoreline using this alternative, but it's already in a disturbed area, of which most of it was already an existing gravel road. So we felt that was the best choice versus doubling, tripling wetlands impact elsewhere. But by having this yellow and the dark green, the 31 acres we were looking to turn to the town for public use, we were protecting 2,200 linear feet of Skaman Brook in and of itself in perpetuity. So the decision was made to focus on engineering design in this area. And essentially the design concepts, we stick to as close as possible to the existing terrain to reduce additional wetlands impacts on either side. The road access, from the 2019 plan, we straightened the road based on TRC comments, direct abutters concerns. The road is designed with large block retaining walls. This to reduce wetlands impacts, but also, as was mentioned earlier on the sidewalk, there was concern about the tree line adjacent to the old gravel road. There were swamp oak locations. So Jim went out, we flagged those, and then we designed the road to protect, using the large blocks, to protect that swamp white oak stand. So out of the 20 total in the stand that are within the developed area, the white portion, not in the yellow, there were 20 that were identified in the total area of development, of which only 4 would be impacted. But in addition, Kristen asked that we could identify additional swamp oaks. Jim went out again and we walked the entire property, and he located, I can't remember the number, Jim, but I think it's like 6 different locations, which are shown on the plan. And essentially what it does is that there's small clusters, groups of swamp white oak throughout the entire preserved property. So, and I think it was approximately 250 that were identified over 6 inches in these clusters. And out of that, we're impacting 4 total. And preserving that tree line, that was the question. In regards to, essentially, we've designed the road access to the highest degree possible, with going from the 18-foot road. We were asked for public safety, as discussed. It's now a 20-foot wide road at the beginning. We're requesting a waiver to 4 feet for the sidewalk entrance at that location to minimize wetlands impact. We wait till we get out of the wetlands buffer zone and the shoreline protection to then expand to the full 24-foot road and 5-foot sidewalk for the remainder. So some public safety issues were taken into account, as was minimization of wetlands impacts. In regards to the house locations, and what essentially, I guess the only question that is raised is the 1,320 feet of structure encroachment that we're requesting as part of our CUP. Essentially, the 2019 plan that we provided you showed 3 of the 6 wetlands encroachments that we were looking for structures back then. But then we came up with engineering issues, which essentially came down to, there were two locations. One was lot 1, and the other was for 10 and 11, where you see the two largest individual encroachments at 11 and 1. And essentially those were engineering issues, and simply put on for unit 11 and 10. The reason we have the encroachment on 11 is because in our 2019 rendering, we did not even think about it at that point, but we did not provide access to get to where we would have drainage facilities once they were finally located. And so it required us redesigning, as Christian said, he and I have spent a year looking at 100 different variables for the design for minimization. And so what we were able to do is essentially to combine the use. We changed number 10 to a different configuration. You'll see we've got actually 4 different essentially housing styles that are designed specifically to minimize any encroachment. We have essentially squares. We have longer, thin rectangles. We have the tiered squares like on 14, 13, 12, and 11, which having a tiered design allows them to move closer to the circle and the arc that's there and minimize any encroachment. But when we came down to 11, we made 10, and 11, we had a design issue of getting a road or an access from the cul-de-sac down to the drainage pond, and at the same time still having our housing units. And we were able to come up with a design that with a shared driveway for 10, still maintain our building separation and get access to the drainage pond for maintenance and to the farm road to allow for the annual field mowing to maintain the grassland habitat. And in addition, it also will serve as a function for the residents on units 1 through 9 who don't have direct abutting access to the open space areas. It will serve as a second area for their access to the open space areas. In addition, the plan is one more, which is at Station 345, just where the culvert comes under Wild Apple Lane at the first drainage pond. There's an access point there. So within 300 feet either direction, those people will have direct access also. What else? Oh, yes, Unit 1. In Unit 1, let's get sheets of the. Yeah, let's go to the better scale. Okay, excellent. So for the unit, that's Unit 1 there, and basically the design. If you look at the design of the road, and when you have the time, you look at the profiles. The road is designed to follow the contours of the property. So to minimize any additional grading, filling, to limit any encroachment or push to go into the buffer areas. So we follow the contours. A second consideration when we laying out the road and the units 1 through 8 is the abutters to the north. Impacts on them. We've provided a 25-foot vegetated buffer, but also by, you'll see the dark black line along that edge. That acts as a retaining wall. And so we're able to drop the elevation of the grading there to almost match the road and allows us to reduce the height of those houses so it won't impact the visual view of the abutters. But the one problem we came up with was on Unit 1, where there is the slight encroachment. The maximum depth into that arc is 8 feet. Right there. The total impact is 202 feet. And the engineering issue there is, if you'll notice at this location, the topographical contours, this section is very steep from the back down towards the road. We're talking about 10 feet. At that location where the driveway is, we're talking about an elevation of 37 and I believe 37.4 or 5 on the road. And at the rear of where the retaining wall is, we're talking at right now original grade of 47, 10 feet. So how do you get a house of comparable character to this community and the adjacent neighborhood? So that's where we looked at doing the under garage designs to try to make it fit. Looked at hundreds, 50 to 100 just under garage under designs, and came up with one that fit the best based upon the contours, the grading in the front, utilization of a porch to reach it, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of design issues. But what ended up happening is the majority of garage unders are designed to be side entry. So in addition to the house, you would have the driveway would essentially be an additional 25 feet in length. So that the house that you see, the layout there is designed. Actually, what I did was I added 6 feet to the length of the projection out of the house to allow for a drive-in. Excuse me, it was 8 feet. I believe it was 8 feet of additional length to the house, that section, so that you could have a drive-in from the front. And therefore, the driveway would not be into the wetlands area or the wetlands buffer. So it was actually, we were able to reduce impact 19 feet and reduce the total impact in that location from this design. I can't get it all out, but we were able to reduce the impact by something like 250%. So that was the intent on that location. And then, so we were able to achieve the 16 units here. The only trade-off is the 1,300 of 20 feet of these structural corners that are the backs of houses that do cross into the buffer. But once again, this is mostly all previously disturbed areas. This location was actually where the old road is. Was actually a road that was created for a pit that was permitted by the town of Exeter back here in this location back in the 1980s. The pit was, due to the financial collapse in the 1980s, the pit was abandoned. It was never restored. Bill will remember we were out there and working together with the town. After I purchased it, we went out and we reclaimed that area, but it's all disturbed area. So the lowest value that there is, and once again, another reason to choose this location. So we were able to get the 16 units in with this design, and for the 1,320 square feet of structural encroachment, we were able to eliminate over 9,000 square feet of direct wetlands impact and an untold number of buffer impacts. And the trade-off is by able to put the housing units here, plus the one additional unit, which will be Fee Simple, a lot next to my house at the end of Cullen Way. We were able to accomplish all the goals, and the trade-off is that we now are going to be taking we're offering 1.61 acres of land to be put in perpetual preservation. And essentially, we've located on one of the plans in the green areas. You can see the darker green areas on the Mendez Trust parcel. If we can go back to the conservation plan. Yeah, it's way up here. There we go. If you can blow this one, no, not this one. It's this. You don't have this one, the colored one. Oh.
Brian, I can pop that one up. I don't think Justin's plan is.
Can you do that? Thanks, Christian.
Do we have these maps in our packet?
Yes, you do. You do.
In the 150 pages or so?
Yeah, the maps are at the they're at the very end of our packet. So just scroll all the way to the bottom.
There's a whole bunch in the middle that I did see. It's like reading a small novel.
Well,
we figure we give it to all of you to read at your leisure.
I think it's page 162 of the map of the packet is where the good colored one that we are looking at now is.
Right. And I'd like to point out, can you?
Christian's controlling us.
Oh, Christian. Right. Christian, can you point at the two highlighted green areas? That one there? Yeah. And that one there. And then point out the prime wetland. Yep. And the two vernal pools. And so essentially what we're proposing as one of the things that's allowed in the CUP regulations, and we hope you concur, that a waiver to a perimeter, to the wetlands buffers are allowed if in exchange we can request if we provide a greater buffer to a higher valued wetland area. And what we're basically pointing out is what we're asking for is the lowest, in exchange for 1320 square feet of structure encroachment into the lowest value wetlands buffer. We're taking these two green areas and bringing in approximately 50,000 square feet of buildable area, which will now be eliminated to expand the buffers for those vernal pools, the prime wetlands, and all the other wetlands, so that you have a contiguous, totally protected piece of property. We accomplished our goal. We hope you agree. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
I guess before we get into discussion, Kristen Murphy, do you want to make a comment or question? I know we'll then maybe move into public comment.
Yeah, I just think it would be helpful for the commission, Christian, I think since you're screen sharing, to indicate where you went during the site walk. So you came, it was a while ago, but you came in off of Brian's property. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, we came in and we walked.
And then we popped into the woods and looked toward the prime wetland.
Yeah, right.
And then we went through the wet meadow via that woods road. And then out the gravel road.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, the upper Oprah field was white and then out to down the gravel road to Tamarind Lane.
I don't remember doing that. Maybe I didn't go.
I was there. I believe Carlos was there.
Yeah, I was there as well.
Trevor,
that coincides with most of what I recall.
Yeah, I do remember we went out to that peninsula and we looked at there's a fair amount of Phragmites, I remember, in the wetland. And I remember the discussion of the swamp white oaks along the access road and the wet meadow. I think it was fairly wet at that time. But it's true that you don't I believe you included pictures, which were helpful in the packet that we have. So folks who weren't able to see it, you get some sense of it, but it is quite a diverse property in these different habitats and areas. So I guess before we get into more discussion, I would like to offer opportunity for, if there's any, I know there's some folks who have been listening. I don't know if they have any comments they want to make or questions. Dan, can you remind me, is it *9? What is the procedure for call-ins to ask a question?
So for phone calls, it's *9. Okay. And if you are on Zoom proper, it is if you click the button at the bottom that says participate, I believe attendees, you should see a button at the bottom that says raise hand.
Okay, so I'm
seeing have one hand raised.
Yeah. So how do they speak? Okay, Lisa and Neil, I believe you're on the line. If you want to make a comment.
Hi, good evening. It's Lisa Blyken, 11 Tamarind Lane. Can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks for the opportunity to comment tonight and for your careful consideration of these conditional use permits. I wanted to comment on a few areas of concern for us. The first is around drainage. It's been pretty well documented, I think, all the way back to the development of Graybird Farm Circle in the 90s. And if you were to visit Tamarind Lane today, you'd immediately see evidence of water with ponds, culverts, wetlands, viewable from the road before you even enter the property. So, and appreciate the benefits of an open space development. I completely appreciate the but in this case, all the impacts are also concentrated in that area. And there's a lot going on in that Tamarind Lane, Wild Apple Lane intersection. So I just want to ask that as you proceed, that the commission give a lot of thought and consideration as to how much the land and the parcel can bear. I think I listened into the TRC meeting, and it sounds like each of these homes have foundation drains. So I wonder, where is all of this water going? And can the surrounding wetlands and flood zones handle it? Also, uplands and wetlands are so interrelated. So what happens when you put 16 homes on this parcel and take up all of that upland in this area? And then can the wetlands, the shorelands, the flood zones, and the neighboring properties absorb all of this without negative impacts? We're not opposed to development of this site, but we're definitely concerned about the size and the density of this development. I think there was mention this evening and in other meetings about previous alterations on the site, a clay pit, and then soil brought in from a sewer project. I wonder how that impacts things. And I think a project of this consequence might deserve a closer look, maybe a stormwater management evaluation or more discussion of the work that's been submitted in that area. I know of another recent project where neighbors had voiced concerns about drainage, and when building began, sure enough, they had water in basements where they hadn't had it before and water in yards where they hadn't had it before. Another issue that was raised, I think, at the TRC meeting, and a couple of us have questions about, is around the snow storage and also snow and road treatment. Where is the snow going? Is it being pushed into wetlands and shorelands? What chemicals are being used? Are those being dumped into there as well. And then likewise for fertilizer as well. The other major issue that I wanted to raise is around accessibility of the conservation land. This development really doubles the number of homes on Tamarind Lane and is going to be a substantial disruption to our neighborhood. So we would just ask that you give careful consideration to the impacts, the wetland and shoreline impacts here, and the protection of the resources. Part of the real, probably the only benefit of this project to the neighborhood is the preservation of the conservation land and accessibility to it. There's value in its location. There's especially value in the continuity of and the contiguous nature of conservation lands in our area. There's different parcels around us, and having something that is in between that connects the various parcels, whether you're looking at the Saltlands at Riverwoods, Jolly Rand across the way. There are a lot of great places, public spaces to walk and enjoy around here. And this does offer a key piece. However, it's not quite clear to me how the public would actually get to this parcel. So I know this may not be for immediate discussion tonight, but I think when you're looking at the conservation land, whether it's fully deeded over or it's a conservation easement, the real benefit that the neighbors and the residents of Exeter can get from this land would be being able to access it and enjoy it, in addition to having it preserved from further development. So I wonder, is the access only going to be from Kingston Road? Our understanding is that as neighbors, we wouldn't be able to access it through Wild Apple Lane. I wonder also if there's maybe accessibility options off Cullen Way. And then along the lines of the conservation land, I know that there's mention in the packet, and again, maybe this is a topic for another evening, but there's mention in the packet around hunting rights on the conservation land. I have no problem with hunting. Hunters are some of the original conservationists. We've hunted upland game and have 2 retired bird dogs ourselves. And hunters are really dialed into the rhythms and the ways in the natural world. But that said, I don't really feel like hunting belongs on this parcel. There's an athletic and kids park on one end. There's homes in the surrounding neighborhoods. There's a business condo park on the other side. And so I think for the neighborhood, there's a big safety concern around that. And then I also think having hunting on a public parcel limited to such a small number of people sounds quite exclusive, almost like a private hunting preserve. Lastly, around kind of the wildlife control issues, I'm not quite sure what the coyote control entails, but in the interest of protecting natural resources, I think maybe rather than endorsing or approving hunting and removal methods, education and guidelines for those in the homeowners association about how to deter wildlife and prevent unwanted reactions and interactions, and then also relying on licensed wildlife experts would probably be a more acceptable, tolerable method as far as the neighborhood's concerned. And then we do have a neighbor, Laura Knott, who's at 15 Tamarind Lane, who isn't able to participate tonight, but she sent me a couple of comments as well. So I just wanted to make sure that those were included also. And Laura also had a comment around accessibility, and it looks like And again, maybe this is an issue for another evening, really, when you talk about the open space, but the HOA maintained common open space, it's really the HOA common open space that's going to connect all of these local conserved areas. So again, this Mendez Trust parcel looks kind of landlocked to us. Sorry about that. This wouldn't be owned or maintained by the town, and so it's not quite clear, again, how the public might actually access the conservation land other than perhaps through Kingston Road. And then the last question is around, that Laura wanted me to mention, is around the property at the end of Cullen, there is a single family home that's proposed to be built there. And she just asked whether or not there are wetland or shoreline impacts there as well. So thank you again for the time to comment. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa, for those comments. She raises some good things we may want to circle back to. I see Mark, your hand is up. Mark Page. See if we can get you. Hi. Mark, I believe you're there now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. I just have a couple of preliminary comments. I guess, and you know, I know there are a number of legal issues running around here.
Excuse me, Mark, could you please identify your address for the record?
Sure. I live at Tamron Lane, 13 Tamron Lane, in Exeter. So I have a couple of comments, I guess. I know there are a couple of legal issues running around with respect to the transfer of density, about how the number of units have arisen on Wild Apple Lane. And I think there's some town council opinions on that this board might be interested in seeing. The other thing I would want to, a couple of other things, and I really can't go beyond what Lisa Bleakin has said, because I think it's really on point with respect to the hunting issue that seems to be proposed here. But the process issue here, to me, I've had trouble watching the green and the blue and the cursor bouncing around, as we go through the lots and stuff. It just seems very difficult to follow. So if I'm sitting in your position, I would be, I guess, a little kind of concerned about that. And this is a consequential decision to a neighborhood here in Tamron and Cullen. So I think there's lots going on there. And I guess, as Lisa had mentioned, this is a consequential decision to folks who live here, who have kids here. And I would just urge the board to move cautiously, do a site walk, do all of the things that need to be done to carefully consider the design issues that have been highlighted by other folks here as it relates to this. So I'm a very concerned abutter and neighbor to this, and I would appreciate a very considered opinion that thinks about all of the issues that have gone on to lead to this point. It's not a straight line as has been depicted here. I think there's a lot of complications. There's a number of legal issues running around here with respect to transfer of density, with respect to the contract allegedly between the town and Mr. Grist about the Brickyard Pond issue. So I think there's a lot of things here for this commission to consider, and I would urge you to do so. And I appreciate the time to speak here tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Are there any other public comments? Peter Steckler?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Peter. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I'm Pete Steckler. I live at 4 Locust Ave in Exeter, and full disclosure, I'm an alternate on the planning board, and I hope to tune into more Conservation Commission meetings, just because I'm very interested in projects that have wetland impacts and natural resource impacts. So I have one question about the homeowner association maintain common open space. And, you know, it's in light of the testimony by Mr. Gove and Mr. Hurley about the great wildlife habitat associated with the open field that's going to be developed and the wetland resources. And that the proposed development will likely push some of the wildlife habitat in the current upland open space area that's going to be developed down towards the wetland that sounds like it's mowed and maintained on a regular basis, and it's so it's maintained in field habitat. So my question is, will there be any restrictions on the use of that homeowners association maintained common open space? For example, you know, dog walking, off-leash dogs, that kind of thing that could be very disruptive to the wildlife that we're talking about pushing from a bit further north on the site down into the wetland. You know, I think that's worth the commission considering, you know, because you wouldn't want what I think what we're coming to understand is this valuable wetland habitat to sort of become the dog park recreation area, and all that recreation impacting this habitat that, you know, we're under the impression is protected because it's wetland habitat, but in fact it's mowed, sounds like annually, and therefore could be more conducive for recreational uses and potentially high density recreational uses given the density of the development proposed for the site. So that's my first comment that the board might consider or that the applicant might respond to. My second one is related to a case that was in front of the planning board recently, the McFarland Ford property, where there was a prime wetland, and Mr. Gove indicated that based on recent laws that the prime wetland boundary expands to the edge of the wetland. And I don't know the answer to this. I'm interested in Mr. Gove's response, whether that's the case for this particular site and the prime wetland on the Menendez Trust portion of the property. And if that's not the case, why not here? But that was the case at the McFarland Ford site. So thank you very much for the opportunity to weigh in.
Thank you, Pete, for those comments. Are there any other additional comments? I know we can have some discussion of Pete's comments and other comments made just now. Okay, I'm not seeing any other public comments. So I guess we can move into sort of an open discussion. Maybe Jim Gove, do you want to, or Luke, do you want to address Pete Steckler's recent comment regarding prime wetlands?
Yeah, I'll be glad to. Pete's absolutely right. There was a law that was put into place in 2012, which attempted to essentially identify where the prime wetland boundary would be if it was, in fact, challenged. That was the whole basis underneath that law. Now, we did not, in the case of McFarland Ford, we did not challenge the boundary at all. In fact, what we said was that because the boundary of the prime wetland was essentially sitting in the middle of another wetland area, and then it also extended into upland areas and then back into wetland areas, we had to make adjustments based upon that a law, or actually it was both a law and then became a rule change of 2012. In this particular instance, we aren't anywhere near the prime wetland. There is no question about whether or not there are any detrimental impacts of the prime wetland. And in addition, if you look at where the prime wetland is situated, even if it was expanded out, it essentially, we have a road in between before you ever even get the parcel where the housing would be. So it's almost a moot point in this particular instance. It just doesn't come into play at all. And I hope that helps.
Okay. I guess that helps to some extent. His other question related to and I think it came up before, maybe you can talk about, are there restrictions in the common space, the open space that will be HOA maintained?
And that would have to be one that's handled by Justin and Brian, because I did not have input into that.
Yeah.
Hello. I can answer the questions.
Okay.
Andrew?
Yeah.
I'm just going at the different, in regards to the HOA area. First off, for clarification, for Pete, the mowing is done at the end of the year. So it's not a mowed field during the summer. It's during high activity, people outdoors. So it's allowed to grow for nesting birds. The mowing doesn't actually occur until the fall. So it's not like it's going to look like a football field. Let's go out there and play soccer. That's not going to happen. In regards to dog walking, yes, there's going to be restrictions regarding that. One of the things we're contemplating right now that we've been looking at, a dog walking park may be located on the farm road, slightly farther down, but not blocking access. If there was a area for dog walking, because everybody seems to have a dog these days after COVID. So we want to that's what brought it up in my mind, is just everybody's out walking dogs. We would looking at providing a location, of course, with the concurrence of the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board. In regards to snow storage, you can see that the way the roadway is designed, snow storage is designed to flow into and come through you're looking at, for the main part of the road, it's with gutters, takes all runoff from the street. It then flows down into the drainage treatment ponds. So we have our pre-treatment, which is in accordance with state standards. It specifically suggests that snow storage melt be allowed to run into those pre-treatment drainage ponds. And that is how we've designed it. The same is true on at the circle. There are not curbs, but it's a hyper elevated design without curbs to channel all of the snow melt into where the center of the cul-de-sac is, which is a pre-treatment pond, so that we can have, which would be the majority of the snow, will be pushed to that location and then could go into that pre-treatment area before it even gets to the drainage pond. So yeah, we've looked into that. That's been addressed. Storage. There's one more thing.
Yeah, site access.
Site access for the HOA, or you mean for the comments from, I can find the notes. Lisa? Yeah.
So I think there were a few comments regarding, public access to the Mendez lot.
Yeah, essentially, I'd like to be diplomatic. Essentially, the regulations and the zoning don't require that we turn over any property in this development to the town for public access. It's not required, nor does it require the amount that we have offered to do so. And the concept behind that was so that our neighbors could enjoy. So that's why we broke out the 31.61 acres, was to allow public use, but with certain reservations, which we could have if it was HOA maintained. I'm an old Marine. Veterans, and especially disabled veterans, are an issue for me. And for the past 30 years, I've allowed 4 veterans to hunt on the property. And I wish to continue that tradition. And as we put forth in what we've submitted, we're more than willing to open that area up to the rest, the people in our neighborhood and the general public in full. But we would like to have that privilege for our veterans, our heroes, to have a place where they can go, especially the disabled. But in regards to access, we gave 9.4 acres to the town as the recreational park and open space area. We've connected that contiguous 31.6 acres to make it contiguous. So if the town wishes to open it up to the public, it can. But my wife and I, our 3 criteria are: we wish to preserve the property environmentally in perpetuity. We wish to allow the veterans to continue to hunt that property as a privilege for their service, a thank you. And the third concern we have is to be able to regulate pests, coyote and beaver, because it is a shallow area and it needs to be managed. And as long as those conditions are essentially met with the town, we have no problem opening it up to the public. But if the neighbors insist that they don't like those conditions, that we're more than glad to turn it over to the town. And we've also added in our notes that the ability to, if in the future there was a needed additional groundwater source, that it could be explored, and potentially, I believe, that it could be used in the future for a water source, and that would be allowed with conditions. But the point is, if I'm trying to do what's good for the people of Exeter, but if they're going to throw out those conditions, there's no reason for me to actually turn it over as a total open to the general public. We can do conservation easement, just preservation only. We could reduce it. We could reconfigure. We're trying to be good neighbors, but we don't see it as an issue to try to leverage a reduction or a more convenient access. Kingston Road is getting a sidewalk from our neighborhood to the park. I helped pay for part of the creation. We've donated the land for the park. The access is there. The parking is there. It's there. If people want to go for a walk, walking a little farther to get to that location, I can't see where should force us to change our values and beliefs. So I'm willing to work with them, but it's got to be reasonable and it's got to be fair for everyone.
Well, I think that's something that comes down the line, Brian. As you know, if you want to just give it to the town, then the town would have it and they could put a school out there, whatever they want to do. If you want to put a conservation easement, then we have to go and look at the conditions of that. If you want to give it to the town to be overseen by the Conservation Commission, then again, we have to go through all the, to kind of negotiate the terms of those. And that's down the line still.
I totally agree, Bill. And we know, that comes in the future. We just wanted the intent clear of what we're trying to do. In regards to, it just popped out of my head. Oh, no, I'm getting tired too. No, in regards to doing the thing, in what I envisioned remember back when we deeded the park and the 9.3 acres of park and open space, there were certain provisions that it could only be used for open space and not for recreation. It was supposed to be a kids park. We donated the original jungle gym and tower and swings that were there. The intent, we have specific intent of gifting this land to the town. If the town doesn't want it, that's okay. I can redesign this. But if the town would like it and to share it, we're more than willing to do so. But, it'd be, what we're looking for is kind of along the same lines of what we did with the town 27 years ago. Does that make sense, Bill?
Yeah, we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
That's an issue down the road.
Yeah. Okay, we have a few comments, maybe Julie and then Don.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm just going to address the hunting issue. Just for kind of FYI for everybody that is on either side of the issue. State law prohibits anyone discharging a firearm within 300 feet of an inhabited property. How you judge 300 feet is a guess to me, but it's there. And the other thing is that there's currently a House Bill number 307, which would prohibit municipalities from prohibiting firearms on any municipal property. So that would go for all conservation areas, anything the town owns. So call your senator because it's in the Senate now, passed through the House.
That's the one that would allow, you could not prohibit guns on school property, right?
School property still really belongs to the federal law, the school safety zones and the federal law. This one, they argue that it will affect school property, but it won't. But town office building, recreation park, anywhere the town has responsibility.
You're saying they're prohibiting guns?
No, they want
prohibiting the banning of guns.
Exactly.
Prohibiting the banning of guns.
Prohibiting. Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm clear. Clear as mud. Don. You're muted, Don.
I gotta hit the right button. Thank you. Couple of questions, but I just want to go back and fall back on what Julie was talking about. We already have in town, I think it's in our regulations, we have prohibited, or we have in our bylaws, our rules prohibited the discharge of firearms in a couple of conservation properties, i.e. the Henderson Swayze Town Forest. If this law passes through the House and is signed by the governor, does that mean that law is now our own municipal law that we've put in place years ago is out, Julie?
Yes, it will be preempted by the state law.
Preempted. Okay, thank you. So the other question is, I know we're talking about the parcels that are going to be put into preservation. There's the Mendez piece that we just talked about, and there's the HOA piece. Couple of questions I have. the field area, the open field, which has been labeled as HOA, is that going to be public or is that private property? Because we have property today put in conservation under the under HOAs, homeowners associations, that are they're private. They're only for the homeowners association. What is the intent of this particular property? Because the question seems to come up, have access to it.
Yeah, Bill. Excuse me. Oh, Don, I'm sorry. The top of your head's cut off.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll put it back in.
We're looking at it, but the intent right now is that the HOA would be restricted to it's the community, the condominium community, the 16 units, because it's right within there, as Jim was describing it. It's their viewscape. So having it become an open public park is not what we were envisioning. Whereas the other.
No, I understand. Okay.
Yeah. And then
I just want to be clear on that because we do have in town other associations where there is property associated with it that is just like that. It's only for the use of the association.
Right.
It's not public land. Yeah. So that's not unheard of. The second piece is the Mendez piece, and the Mendez Trust, which is 31 acres.
31.6.
Which we're talking about whether it's going to be fee simple, deeded over to the town of Exeter, or it's going to be in a conservation easement. Those are things to be worked out, as everybody says, down the line. But there is direct access. There is direct access through the rec park, the Brickyard Park, and I think you can also have access off of the Brickyard Condo Association Road.
Well, in regards to the Brickyard's condos, that access can't be utilized for anything other than residential. So the intent was, we've talked with those abutters, and our intent is to just relinquish the rights so that in accordance with the master plan, page 41 or whatever, where it specifically talks about our parcel and the development of the Kingston Road NP area, that would give them greater flexibility to develop that. They've got a chunk of land there, and for the development potential would be greater by relinquishing it. And since it can't be used, it makes no sense to keep it.
But there is a means of public access to the Mendez Realty Trust. That's what I just wanted to reaffirm.
Oh yes, definitely through the Brickyard. There's there.
Okay, so the other question I have is, where is this development with the planning board? Has it gone to the planning board for review yet, or is it being reviewed? Is it an approved plan from the planning board, or are we still in that phase?
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Clement, this is Justin.
Hi, Justin.
Hi. So the planning board process has been long. It was about a year. But where we're at is that we have an approved yield plan, which was the second plan that we showed you tonight. We have now refiled the site plan review application and the conditional use permit applications. We expect to go to them for the first time next week. So you're really right in the middle. We're going to start the sort of substantive site review process next week with them.
Okay, so the plan that we're seeing tonight is the plan going before the planning board in a couple of weeks.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I think it's great talk about all the preserved land, but I think what's expected of us tonight is our recommendation on 2 conditional use permits. Kristen, is that correct?
That's correct.
And maybe that's what our focus should be, because the planning board will be looking to that, and it'll be part of their decision-making process as they move forward, whether to approve or not approve this particular development. And once we have that point, then we can talk about how the town would like to see the approach on the Mendez Trust property, 31 acres. So maybe we should concentrate more on the CUPs tonight, and not the other issues that are really going to be, they could be several weeks, several months, or many months down the road. Does that make sense, or am I? I'm not trying to cut off.
Don, I agree with you 100%.
You know, we're at 9:30.
Yeah,
and we're certainly not going to. You know, we need to. I mean, if the intent tonight is to get our recommendation on the CUPs, if we can do that, I think that's what we should try to get done tonight.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Why don't we focus on the developed portion of the lot for now? And are there any specific comments on the wetland impacts or the wetland buffer impacts? I have one question regarding this. It looks like building 11, just to be specific, it's one of the building setbacks. Does it have a deck in the back of it? There's a little rectangle that sticks out behind it, and that deck is not included in the impact calculation. But I'm just curious. There's several sort of exterior rectangles in some of the buildings, and I didn't see those labeled as to what those are.
In answer to that, the solid lines are for structures that are calculated as impervious surface. The dash lines off the back where it's dashed, there's a jog, that would be a deck. The calculations were based upon the actual structures, with the decks not included in the calculation. They can be if you'd like them included. One of the provisions within the wetlands buffer districts, when you're looking for conditional use waivers or just the standards, is that decks are allowed for a certain number of square feet. They are allowed within the buffer. So that was I guess you can give us your recommendation of how it should be treated. We can add that. You know, we're talking not a great deal of increased square footage. If you wanted to count it as impervious surface structure, we could do that too and amend the filing. But that decks and what do they call gazebos are an allowed use for a single family residence within the buffer area. So that's why we did what we did.
Okay. I know sometimes we will see temporary impacts and versus permanent impacts, and maybe we don't have it broken out that way, because I guess it does seem like there will be more buffer impacts when you look at that in terms of just constructing the development than was shown. Is that correct?
Well, Christian can get into exactly where he put the temporary impacts that allow for construction that will be reclaimed. You can see on the application, it's a different number, which allows for that construction activity, but then everything is restored to essentially an existing grade.
Mr. Chairman, do we have to do these all tonight? I felt we were throwing an awful lot of material to digest. I haven't digested it, and if we need to, fine. But I'm not much good past 10 o'clock, and I know that this will take a long time. At least, my judgment in the last several times we've done this, it takes a while to get through both sessions. Also, I would like to see the property myself, but if everybody else has seen it, that's fine. But I would ask that we maybe discuss it a little more, but not have to vote on those motions tonight. Just one.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. Understood. This is it was a big submittal. And there's a fair amount to digest. So I don't think we're required to decide anything tonight if we don't feel comfortable. It does sound like we have an opportunity to provide the planning board some timely input in their review of this plan. So we may, if we don't vote, we may want to, at least if we have some initial comments, provide those. Kristen Murphy, do you have any opinions that you would like to share with us at the moment?
So my thought is I would prefer the planning board not take full action on the conditional use permits without your input. I think that's important. And so my suggestion is to get what you feel you can get through today and see how that goes. But I understand it is a lot of information. You don't have the full TRC response because that occurred just prior to the Concom submittal deadline. But I believe Dave would support me in saying that the planning board should not take action on a conditional use permit without your input, that it's required. So that at least that portion of the application won't be taken action on. They might discuss other parts of it.
And Mr. Chairman, I don't mean to interrupt, Kristen, but I agree with everything you just said. And just from the applicant's, perspective, this was a real kind of question mark coming into tonight. We didn't know how it was going to go. We didn't know the exact consistency of the commission. We want to, be deferential to those who weren't here for the original presentation. And we want to get this right. I mean, no one wants to rush this. We don't expect that there's going to be one meeting before the planning board. It's going to be a couple of meetings. So we defer to the commission. We want you to digest the information. We want to answer any question that you have. You understand our perspective. We really think that this is a thoughtful application which best exemplifies avoidance and minimization, which is at the root of all wetland applications, and also the spirit of the town's regulations. So we can answer questions tonight. I'm not sure what the board or the commission's schedule is. I know that ordinarily it meets on a monthly basis. Certainly, the Grisettes would be happy to entertain another site walk if that's the will of the commission. If there's any ability at all to meet in a frequency less than once a month, if there's a 2-week option, obviously we'd be interested in that. But the main point I'm making here is we're not trying to rush anyone. We want to get this right, and we defer to the commission.
Okay.
I would say if there are things in the response that you feel you need additional information on, it would be really good to have that discussed tonight. So if the applicant does return to you for action on the CUP, they come with all of the submittal includes all of the things that you might feel are needed.
I just realized that if we go beyond the end of this month, I will not be a regular board member, so I will be an alternate. Somebody else will be in my spot. So hopefully some of the people who are alternates are really ready to step in and take this on.
Yeah, we do, just so folks are aware, Sally Ward and Ginny Robb won't be in an additional meeting. So Bill, you may get called back to a voting member for this particular project. So I don't know what you're talking about over there. We need you.
Well, I will be an alternate, not it's a select board anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fine. But no, we certainly, are there other members who would be interested in a site walk, either a second site walk or if you weren't around for the first one? I don't know if people want to raise their hand virtually, if that's easiest. Is there any other interest? I don't know if the planning board is doing a site walk or they've done one.
So, Mr. Chairman, it was a joint site walk initially, and there was planning board participation. Without having been back to them on the site plan itself, I'm not sure whether they'll want that again. Certainly, we'd entertain that, but we won't know until we go.
As far as additional information based on concerns of abutters, is there a possibility of getting more information about soil saturation of the area or rainwater impacts, that some type of study reflecting how this might impact the local area? I know you have you're looking at doing the runoff into the cul-de-sac you talked about, but I'm just wondering, are are these homes going to be wet themselves? Like what, just.
So Kristen, just to, there is a drainage analysis that is completed for these projects. You didn't receive a copy of it, but I can be sure that your packet includes that next time. It's a pretty technical document, I will say, but there are strict requirements that they can't increase the amount of water, leaving the property. So we tend to ship out the review of that to our consultant, and their responses are in the technical review committee letters. So you could get some indication on whether their concerns are satisfied by reading the TRC comments, in addition to the drainage analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, our focus, I think, at the moment is really regarding, the wetlands and the wetland buffers, and evaluating those impacts. I guess from my perspective, the packet is quite thorough, as we've made some comments to in the past, and the applicant has done a good job at answering our questions regarding the conditional use permit in a thoughtful way. And there's obviously, as explained, there's been a lot of thought that's gone into this design. So just in terms of, are there additional things that I'm looking for? I don't think there are. I think that this seems like a complete application from my perspective. But I don't know if there are other comments regarding that from other commissioners regarding just the CUP for the wetland and the shoreland district. And so it's the shoreland, just so we're clear, it's Skaman Brook runs into the Little River. And the Little River's just off the property. So that's what pulls it in, correct, as shoreland.
And what was it? Remind me what the shoreline impact is, if any.
So, Mr. Clement, we proposed 7,983 square feet of impact to the 150-foot shoreline protection district line off of Skaman Brook.
So you're okay, and that's permanent impact. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's permanent impact, and that's the road, and it overlaps substantially with the Wetlands Conservation Overlay District.
Okay.
And there really does seem to be no avoiding that impact, that impact, which is the major impact to get into the parcel. So, I mean, yeah, I guess besides some of my comments there on the decks and other temporary impacts within the buffer, I don't have a lot of additional comments or ideas about how this would be minimized further.
And again, I'm trying to remind you what the wetlands impact is. The other CUP we're asking for, just.
Yeah, so the direct impacts, Mr. Clement, are 2,960 direct wetland impacts, all right at the mouth of the intersection between Tamarind and the new proposed road, Wild Apple Lane. And then the remainder of the total. Buffer impact. That's direct impact. That's 2,960 direct wetland impact. Most of that is to the existing or the man-made pond. And then beyond that, there's in the Conservation Overlay District, again, distinct from the Shoreline Protection District, in the Conservation Overlay District, there's about 11,000 square feet of buffer impact, which are almost is 90% related to the road and the detention ponds.
Okay, so with the first impact you talked about, you're going to require a wetlands permit, fill permit, right?
Correct, minimum, yep.
Yes.
Thank you.
And we're not commenting on that. That would
I understand.
We would also need to comment
make it clear in my head as to the different permits from a conservation standpoint, from an environmental standpoint that they are looking for.
Correct. Yep.
I know we're not doing a wetlands permit, dredge and fill application tonight. I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you. I want to be clear in my mind. Thank you.
And they've also got to, yeah, I thought I was muted for a second. They're also be pursuing an alteration of terrain permit, which of course is related intricately with the stormwater management of the whole site. So that's another sort of level of review that will happen at the state level.
And that hasn't been submitted yet?
Correct.
No, it has not. Mr. Chairman, if I may, I just wanted to pipe in on a couple of comments. First, getting back to the temporary impacts, it's just over 8,700 square feet of temporary impacts. That does include the area to construct the decks that happen to fall within that 75-foot setback. And just to expound on what Attorney Passay just mentioned, and Kristen, the town has their own reviewing engineer that reviews our drainage calculations. And then the state, obviously the professional engineers with DES Alteration of Terrain Bureau, they have their criteria that we have to meet, and they review our drainage analysis in detail as well, along with the plan set.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the drainage comes up a lot, and I realize it's not always our purview, but it is related in terms of water. So
absolutely.
Okay. So do we want to make any other comments, or are we prepared to table this at the moment? I'm not getting a lot of comments from folks that are seeming to want to make a motion. Trevor, do you have any input? You've been awfully quiet over there.
Yeah, I have been pretty quiet. I was sort of just like taking this all in and chewing it on a bit. But I really agree with your comments earlier that I feel that when it comes to actual minimization here and really trying to scope this down to what we're talking about tonight with the CUPs, I feel like this project has done a very good job of really bringing that down to minimizing wherever possible. I mean, with a large percentage of this being the road and the access. I've been going through those plans. I mean, there isn't anything I'm seeing that I would like additional information just for this decision that we're trying to make tonight here that I would feel needs to be tabled. I feel the minimization is good. So.
Okay, thank you, Trevor. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'd be in agreement with that. And I did walk the site. And any impact obviously is ideally be avoided. But where that impact is, obviously was impacted previously with the pond that was put in and the road that was put in. So looking at the entire property, it's also the furthest away from connections into the Little River and the brook. And I think, again, like has been mentioned, a very conscientious and thorough job has been done to try to reduce the impacts. So I'm comfortable, I think, with having been at the site and seeing what's been done, and had a couple presentations as well to proceed with the decision tonight.
I'd just like to add my point to my point too, that I appreciate Jim's point much earlier, actually talking about what functions we're trying to protect here as well. And with a lot of the impacts being applied to the man-made pond, I feel like when it comes to actual functions, it's not like we're taking a big bite out of those. So in the case of like, there was a man-made pond created here. It's being used as habitat in some cases, but it's not like there's a large amount of detriment that's being done to that pond itself, even though the majority of the impacts are sort of targeted in that area. So again, I feel like the applicant has done a commendable job at shifting where these impacts are being applied and minimizing wherever possible.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I will acknowledge the public comment that was made, and it may not be clear on the plan, but I will acknowledge that there is a lot going on between the proposed access to the site, the pond, and then on the opposite side off property, there's another driveway that runs parallel, the private driveway that runs parallel to this new proposed access to another home, and there's Tamarind Lane. So there was concern about that intersection that's being created in drainage in that intersection. And I would just like to acknowledge, and I don't know that it's really part of this review, but that does seem like a complex little area given all the uses, somewhat conflicting uses of land right there in terms of a little the pond, and then almost entirely surrounded by roads. So,
Kristen, you said that TRC report was just submitted recently. Is there things in there that we should be aware of before we go ahead? And I don't mean to hold this up tonight. If you want to go through all the conditions, but it's a time factor in my case, because we have to go through 6 or 7 conditions in each of the 2 CUPs, and that takes more than 5 minutes. That's all. But what about the TRC? Is that bring up some things that we should look at?
So I do not have, and I've not yet seen a consolidated list of comments from the TRC. I believe the applicant has received them. The recent TRC committee meeting, Dave Sharples, sorry, I'm getting an echo, but Dave Sharples was not able to attend, so he submitted his comments separately. I did ask him if there were any major concerns on his part that should cause us to pause the applicant from coming to the Conservation Commission, and he did not feel that there was. In terms of my comments, Brian and Justin met with me the other day to walk through them. I had a couple buildings that I was questioning if they could be swapped in order to avoid buffer impacts. Brian stepped through the reasoning behind that, and I suspect that'll happen when we get the written response for you to be able to hear that justification. I had questions about the wildlife habitat assessment. Although I acknowledge what Luke said tonight, I was wanting some discussion about whether a determination was made if the swamp white oak presence there qualified it for a basin, a swamp white oak basin I have the name wrong, but the exemplary community. And when you look at the components of the exemplary community, it did include some of the plant species that were listed in the wildlife habitat assessment. So I was looking for some sort of decision or determination whether it was or wasn't, and why not. Let's see. I expressed that for the HOA land with Scammon Brook, my preference would be in terms of beaver control, that because Scammon Brook is a sensitive resource, I had recommended that they look into beaver management, things like a beaver pipe or beaver deceiver that's a little less intrusive than breaching beaver dams on a regular basis or whatever. And then let's see. I had said it's unclear on what methods would be used for the coyote control, but given the proximity to the residents on the HOA land anyway, hunting, most of the HOA land is within 300 feet of the residents. So I was concerned that it wouldn't be, that trapping would be what would be used for coyote control. And I was concerned about the safety of residents if if there's plans for them to use that as a public space. And then a bunch of questions about the conservation land, but I won't go through those tonight. Does that help?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Don?
Thank you. There's a public comment about the drainage on already a drainage problem on Tamron Lane, I believe, earlier this evening. And if memory serves me correct, I thought the town was supposed to replace a culvert there a year or so ago, and we didn't do it for some reason. And the town already recognized the problem there with a culvert, and the town was going to replace that. Do you recall that? Anyone, Kristen, do you recall that? Or does Mr. Grist remember that?
Yeah, Don. The culvert collapsed, began collapsing like 15, 20 years ago, did a slip lining. Within the last 5 years, it deteriorated more. 3 years ago, it totally collapsed.
Yeah.
Money was put in the budget last year to do it because we actually have, yes, there is a high impoundment level on the other side of Tamron because essentially it was 100% blocked and was underwashing the road. They did come out and they did attempt to do some opening on it. So there is minimal flow, but it is still raised levels because that whole water basin coming down from River Woods, et cetera, flows down across 111 to there. They were supposed to do it. COVID came and nothing has happened.
So the town has already recognized a drainage issue there.
Yes.
Regardless of your potential development, and has had money put in the budget to try to correct that action. But again, COVID did change a lot of things for a lot of people in a lot of ways. So that's an ongoing maintenance project for the town, regardless of whether this development occurs or not. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, exactly right. And in regards to that question raised of, is this drainage going to impact the others on Tamron Lane? A simple thing to point out is essentially Tamron Lane is at elevation 37 and the flood zone, the wet meadow is at 30. There's 15 feet of a very broad flat plain to handle all the drainage. There will be no impact on the upstream abutters.
Well, that'll be part of the drainage analysis.
Yeah, it's in there. Yeah, thanks, Don.
Okay. Well, thanks. I think this has been a great discussion. I think we're going to just table this at the moment for our next regularly scheduled meeting, which is in May. We don't do meetings every 2 weeks. So I think the general consensus is that I have not heard anything that would prevent us from issuing some CUP, but we just we're not quite in a place to do so tonight. And so we will take this up again in May. We do need to keep talking. We have a few other agenda items besides this. I guess I would like to table it at this point, unless anyone has any further comments regarding this. Kristen? Otherwise, I know it's helpful to have folks like Pete Steckler. He's on the planning board. He's been listening to this conversation and taken part of it. So he will at least have some sense of the flavor of this conversation, and we'll be able to convey that to the planning board maybe. And similarly, I think it is good to have members on attend different types of board meetings. And I know Kristen Murphy, you sometimes go to these planning board meetings, and I occasionally will too. So, Justin.
Yeah, just Mr. Chairman, real quick, thank you very much. And we appreciate the board's time tonight. I think it was a very helpful conversation. The only other thing that we would say is, to the extent that anybody wants to come out, Mr. Grist can entertain even one-offs if they want to walk the property. So it seems like there may not be a motion for a formal site walk or a second site walk, but the invitation is extended and always out there if anybody wants to contact Mr. Grist, and he can give them the tour.
Okay, maybe that's something we could think about organizing internally and then reaching out to you guys if we decide folks.
Very well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, Sally.
Drew, so I just concur that I think it's useful to table unless there's some acute reason why we need to decide tonight. There are a lot of issues that have come up, and I think it's important for the board to be contemplative about these things and make the decision the right way. So I think that that's a useful thing. Not that we're trying to kick the can down the road, but we have an obligation to really think about these matters. And this is a very comprehensive presentation, and there are a lot of variables that I think the board wants to think about. So it's not a criticism of the presentation at all, but just we're trying to do the right thing. So unless there's an acute reason, I think that it's a good thing for the board to continue to think about this and contemplate the issues that have been raised and then decide next time. We can systematically go through the criteria for the conditional use permit and make a rational, thoughtful decision at that time.
Mr. Chairman, do you want a motion to do that? Or do you just think general consensus?
Yeah, let's make a motion to table that, Kristen, right?
Yeah, so the next regular meeting date, just so it's included in your motion, is May 11th.
I would move that we postpone this discussion of the CUPs until our next meeting, May 11th.
Yeah, Bill, would you make the motion, have the motion say to table this?
Table, yes.
Okay, I will second the motion to table the application to May 11th meeting. We'll do a roll call. Sally, one last time.
Okay.
Take us through us.
So Allison's no longer with us, so the alternates voting will be Nick and Connor, I believe, correct? So Drew?
Yes.
Trevor?
Yes.
Sally votes yes. Bill Campbell? Yes. Carlos?
Aye.
Nick?
Yes.
And Connor?
Yes.
That's our 7. Okay, so that's passed. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for the thoughtful discussion. We will pick back up with you next month and review those criteria more specifically. All right. So it's 10 o'clock. We do have some other items. I think we want to approve some money, Kristen. Or I guess let's see if we can run through any of this stuff. Sally, do you have a need? There's a tree committee update that's pertinent.
Yeah. So where am I? Am I on mute? No. So I'll be brief. The hour is late. Just to update from the tree committee. We are working on a tree ordinance for the town, and our intention is to run a draft by the Conservation Commission at the next meeting. Prior to submitting it to the select board, we want conservation to weigh in on our draft of the tree ordinance before we present it to the select board. So that'll happen at the next meeting. The tree walk is now available on the website if you're interested in seeing that. We hope to make that a periodic thing. Tree planting will proceed at Park Street Common, which was postponed last fall because of the drought. And the last item, which is perhaps we take this up at the next meeting, but the tree committee did think it was desirable to have a line item in the town budget to support the work of the tree committee. We're not talking about a lot of money, but there are certain things that come up, such as labels for trees in town that we would like to have. And from time to time, we might need to hire the services of an arborist consultant. So we think it would be desirable not to take money from the Conservation Commission budget. We didn't think that was appropriate, but to have a line item in the town budget. And with the support of the Conservation Commission to pursue that, we would pursue that process. So we presumably go to the Budget Recommendation Committee with a specific dollar amount and a rationale for those expenses. So I think that's just a preview. I don't think we need to make an action on that tonight, but that's what we have in mind, what the tree committee has in mind.
And just to supplement that, Sally, so for the rest of you, that Jay Perkins is the tree warden, and he does have a small budget. This would be an increase to a request for an increase to that portion of his budget.
Yep.
Julie?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on that comment about the budget real quick. I would not recommend having a separate line item. I would recommend having it be part of the conservation or Jay's arbor fund, whichever, just because it means we have to create another line item, and if it doesn't get funded in 1 year, then it goes away, as opposed to being a part. And the tree committee is a subcommittee of the Conservation Commission, so it's really the appropriate place for it.
Okay, so that's good feedback to take back to the committee, and I will do that.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to, unless there's anything up for property management or trails.
There is.
Okay.
Have a property management item. I had sent you all an email about this earlier, but I wanted to talk about Rain's mowing if I could.
Oh, yeah.
The farmer has requested to be modify the mowing restrictions. So currently he's not able to hay Rain's field until after July 15th to give enough time for grassland birds to fledge. As you know, we have not successfully had compliance, I guess, with that in the past. With recognition that the farmer is using the hay for feed, and so the older it gets, the drier it gets, the less quality he can get from it, and things seem to be going to seed and aging a lot sooner now. And so he is requesting the commission to consider allowing him to do an early cut, which would allow the cutting to occur up to through May, sometime in May, but be complete before the end of May, and then not another cut until August. And so I did send you some resources to look at, but cut out some information. Basically what that would do, though it might disturb some early nesting activity of grassland birds, those birds would still have an opportunity to re-nest. Whereas what's happening now, the cut can impact the nesting opportunity for the full season. So
what happened last year was just 1 year, I believe, last year, right? Where it was July?
No, there were two
2 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe I'm misremembering it. I was thinking there were 2 years. I don't know. Sorry.
I think there were.
Yeah. Maybe they weren't consecutive years. I don't know.
Yeah, and last year was complicated by the drought, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. I'm okay with this. It would be a 1 year trial.
Yeah, so my suggestion is to allow it for 1 year. We could.
Yeah, I think we should allow him that. We want to work with this farmer.
I agree. Do we need a motion on that?
Does anyone have? Someone can disagree. So, Carlos.
I just said my agreement. It's mixed. Obviously, anything. I somewhat question whether they will attempt renesting if they get knocked out. It depends on how established the breeding population is. But if it's a trial to work something that's a compromise for a year. Hopefully they are back again this year. Then I'd say it's worth trying.
I agree.
Yeah, I reluctantly agree with Carlos. I'll give it 1 year. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess my only concern is what information are we going to get from this trial? Like, is there something? How are we going to assess whether or not it's effective or not? And so I don't know that there's a clear way to do that. It seems all pretty anecdotal, but we can certainly give them a shot and see what happens. But I guess I would say that I don't know what the trial part of this is, because it's not clear to me how we, both before, I don't know how we could gauge whether or not it was successful with the bird. So we have no real data to back our, I don't know that we have a strong data, maybe we do, to back our original approach. And I don't know what data we're going to collect this year to say that this approach is okay. It all seems pretty squishy to me.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I'm a sucker for an adaptive management approach. But in this case, like, how will we know if what we're doing is beneficial or not? From the material that Kristen sent along, it looks backed up, and I'm totally willing to try it. And I think it looks like a good solution that sort of hits a good middle ground where you have an amount of, nesting timeline for the birds, as well as a timeline that'll work for the farmer, who we definitely want to work with. But that's definitely a hazy spot of, like, how do we know if it's good for everyone involved?
So, definitely anecdotal, right?
Yes.
But last year we were able to document that there was active nest sites at the time of the haying. And so what I had envisioned, the article had said 2 weeks after the cut, the hay is tall enough, the grass is tall enough that birds would re-nest. So that would be an opportunity to continue a second survey. Is it birds that may have been disturbed re-nesting? I don't know, but at least that would be some sort of indication.
That would work for me.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we just want to go out a few times. Okay, I'm not trying to cause
We're
problems.
just anecdotally see whether they do re-nest.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess I'll make a motion that we allow the mowing schedule as proposed by Kristen in May and August for 1 year.
Second. I'll second.
1 year trial period.
Shall we vote? Drew?
Yes.
Trevor?
Yes.
Sally votes yes. Bill?
Yes.
Carlos?
Yes. Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
And Connor?
Yes.
Okay, done. There was another rains issue that I wanted to bring up. Would this be the time to do it, Drew?
Sure.
So, just to update you on LCHIP, we're proceeding. The historical structures report is being revised by Bedard as approved by our discussion last time, and we'll have feedback from him in time to submit our intent. Letter will be due in May, and we need the structures report by then, and we'll have it. And then the application for LCHIP will be in June. So we're working on that full speed ahead. And the last thing is so the chair of the Rains Farm Stewardship Committee is a member of the Conservation Commission by bylaws, definition of bylaws. And since I won't be on the Conservation Commission any longer, I can't continue in that role, although I'd like to stay on the committee. And I did approach Nick, asked him if he would be interested, and he said he would. So I'm very pleased about that. So I'm recommending to the commission that we appoint Nick to be the chair of the Rains Farm Stewardship Committee.
So moved.
Second.
Before he gets a chance to say no.
No discussion.
So shall we vote on that?
Yes.
Okay. I've lost my list.
Yes.
Drew?
Yes.
Trevor? Sally votes yes. Bill?
Yes.
Carlos?
Yes.
Nick, you might want to abstain.
I'll abstain.
And Connor?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Nick, for stepping up to that, and I appreciate that. I think it'll be a great fit.
Excellent.
That's all from me.
Okay.
Could I make one, and if Nick is going to do that, I can let Nick know.
I did promise Kristen, and I said to Nick I would be the point person for the LCHIP application, even if I'm not chairing the committee, because I made that commitment, and I'm happy to do that. See it through until June.
We do have the facilities committee coming out
on Friday.
At 3:30.
Yep.
You don't need to be there, but if you're home early or you would like to come down, that would be good. But we need to have that facilities committee take a look at the barn.
Yeah, we need their support for LCHIP, so that's a good step forward.
I'll be there.
Good.
Great.
Okay. What else? We have some outreach events. Kristen Murphy.
Yeah, so there are two expense requests that I thought I would suggest or request your support for. The first is the Spring Tree Program. I'm happy to say that is happening again this year. Walt is doing a virtual presentation, but he will still be distributing the trees to the students, not personally, but through the school. And so I would like for you I'm requesting that you approve an amount not to exceed $200 to pay for the cost of the seedlings.
So moved.
Second.
Are we ready for a vote?
Yes.
Drew?
Yes.
Trevor? Sally vote. Oh, sorry. Sally votes yes. Bill?
Yes.
Carlos?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
And Connor?
Yes.
Approved.
He's looking at May 8th and 9th to pack the trees up. So if that's something you feel safe doing, please reach out to me. He would love some volunteer assistance to do that.
And that's going to be the same as it was in years past. We're going to his place to pack up and we should probably get the stickers that we did before to put on the bags.
Yeah.
Great.
And then the second item, Jenny, yeah, there she is. You're so shadowed
in the
there.
dark.
She's in the dark, yeah.
So, Jenny, do you want to mention the pollinator book trail and grab and go event or project?
Okay. There's been talk in the commission about having grab and go packets of various items. So I know that the library has had similar projects. So I thought, well, okay. So we're making up grab and go bags that consist of milkweed seed and soil and clay mixture for the applicants to make their own for the takers to make their own seed balls and deposit them on their land or wherever they wish. That's about the 1st of May. I've told the library. And the second is several years ago, we did a story walk out at Morissette with the Gotta Go, the little caterpillar that was trying to get to Mexico. So we still have the pages, the laminated pages, and the kindergarten teachers for the classes at Main Street School will be having the story walk on that path that goes from down by the playground over to Lincoln Street. So that again will be about the 1st of May, and the students will have a already made seed ball at the end of the story walk. So there's about 60 for this kindergarten class. So the expense is really is the milkweed seed.
the packaging for the grab and go kit. And so I think we identified a request for up to $65 for supplies for that. And it's such a great effort on Ginny's behalf. It's brought in some good collaboration with the schools, yet another school project. It's also helped us support the Pollinator Pathways of New Hampshire effort. So thank you so much, Ginny, for taking the ball and running the seed ball.
Yeah, that's I went to that other event, and now I'm happy to report next Monday, my daughter's starting in person with Ginny's,
is she getting back?
Ginny's daughter. So we have our daughters. And so my daughter may get one of these. So I'm excited about that. So thank you, Ginny. I guess I'll move to approve the $65.
Second. So shall we ready for a vote? Drew?
Yeah. Yes.
Trevor?
Yes.
Sally votes yes. Bill?
Yes.
Carlos?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
And Connor?
Yes.
Excellent.
Great.
All right. Thank you, Ginny. That's awesome. We'll be in touch. We'll look out for that. Maybe that'll get some Facebook attention. Kites for cancer, it rains.
Yeah, so the select board is still overseeing permits for events in town, but Ben Anderson reached out. He is collaborating with the Exeter Hospital to host a musician at the Word Barn as part of their Kites for Cancer effort. And he was looking for the Conservation Commission's support to allow people to go across the street. He would have a crossing guard there to be sure people were crossing safely to go across the street and fly kites at rains. He and his family have flown kites out there and felt there was sufficient space to do so even with the power lines present. He talked to the hospital and they don't anticipate too many kites, on the order, if I have the number right, I think it was like 10 up to 10 or something like that, 10 to 15 kites at rains. I checked with Darren Davis just to find out if this event, by the way, is scheduled for the end of May. I checked with Darren Davis to find out if he was concerned at all about people on the field on the hay crop at that time. He said it wasn't a problem. So for Ben to apply to the select board, it would be helpful to know if you are supportive of this event since it's on a Conservation Commission property.
I think it's a great collaboration and partnership. I'm all in favor of it.
I do too. I'll make a motion that we approve that.
Second. Shall we vote? Drew?
Yes.
Trevor?
Yes.
Sally votes yes. Bill?
Yes.
Carlos?
Aye.
Nick?
Yes.
And Connor?
Yes.
Great.
Okay, just the next item, I think we don't need to get too bogged down in this. I had an idea for just a commission get together. We haven't had one in a long time. Thought it would be fun for us all to have like a picnic at Rains one night in May, if it's nice.
That'd be great.
Maybe there's a lot of changes going on. We're losing Ginny and Sally and stuff, so it'd be fun to all get together in person, socially distanced at a little event. So I'll email everyone. Not everyone's here, so we'll kind of try and coordinate that off. If that sounds like a good idea to folks.
Great.
It's totally optional. Okay. Opportunities. There's some links here. Maybe folks can go to that Kristen put out on our agenda. I'm going to say, I think we can just do the minutes next month. I don't even want to think about minutes at the moment. So is there anything else before we adjourn?
Why is Ginny in the witness protection program?
I think that's the real reason why she has to leave.
Yeah, something's going on. I just don't know the story.
She's lost her electricity.
She's saving energy.
So do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor, Drew?
Aye.
Trevor?
Yes, please.
Sally, yes. Bill?
Yes.
Carlos?
Aye.
Nick?
Yes.
Connor?
Yes.
Done.
All right. Thank you, Sally, for all. We're gonna need a new person next month to take over. So we'll adjust. We'll adjust. So thank you all.
Good.
Thank you, Sally and Jenny, for everything, and thanks to everyone for sticking on this one out.
Happy spring.
Good night, all.
Yes. Night. Good night.
Night. Take care.
Great group.